Chapter 1262. On the other side, the Aerial Knight Academy in Greycastle was also bustling with activity. All the training planes had been dragged out of the hangar and lined up at the end of the runway. More than 30 official trainees held their breath and listened attentively to Princess Tilly's lecture. Farther away, those trainees who had not passed the assessment or were newly selected sat around the runway, waiting to watch the new round of flight. From today on, your training will enter a new stage. Tilly stood in front of a group of people who were much taller than her. She raised her head and said, "Think about what you've learned in the past month and tell me loudly. Pat, you start first." "Lift up, Your Highness." The trainee who was pointed out answered excitedly. "Next. Hover. Magic shadow." No." The trainee quickly changed his words. "I mean, anti-dizziness training, Your Highness." "That's strange," Finkin muttered. "Princess Tilly's temper seems to be much better than before." "Really?" Hines also lowered his voice. "You'll be punished if you make a mistake. You've just cleaned the toilet for a month. Have you forgotten?" "I'm not talking about that." Finkin looked at Good. "What do you think?" Good nodded slightly. "I have the same feeling." He had always felt that Princess Tilly seemed to be inexplicably anxious, which probably had something to do with the poor performance of the Aerial Knight Academy. Out of the 200 or so people who had passed the test, only about 30 of them were standing here. It would not have been a big deal if it was just the low passing rate. Airplanes were being sent in one after another, but there were still only 6 usable airplanes in the hangar. The rest had all been damaged during the test. According to instructor Eagle Face, a plane was even more expensive than a ship. Thousands of gold royals were gone just like that, so no one would be in a good mood. However, the situation seemed to have changed recently. Her Highness was still strict, but there was less of that suffocating heaviness between her brows. The number of airplanes they crashed recently had not decreased. "Finkin, it's your turn," someone around reminded him. Finkin hurriedly straightened his back and said, "Discipline. Your Highness, I've learned discipline." "And duty," cried Hines. The crowd roared with laughter. "TSK, I've already suggested that we should send these guys into the barracks and educate them for a month or 2. This is what it's like to be a commoner. Just bear with it." Obviously, these words came from the mouths of students selected by the army. After being punished to clean the toilets for a month, their deeds had become a model for the entire academy. However, the other students who were born as commoners would at most join in and make fun of them. Only the First Army would scoff at their behavior and want to immediately escort them to the North Slope mine. Tilly didn't say much. "Next." Good cast aside all distracting thoughts and said seriously, "Passion." Whispers could be heard in the queue again. "You call this learning? I'm afraid you can't think of any other words." He had thought that Princess Royal Highness would express her dissatisfaction or ask further questions, but she only looked at him for a moment, and then turned to the next student. After everyone had answered, Tilly nodded and said, "You haven't been flying for a long time, but you've learned a lot. Now integrate them together and use them in the following training, whether it's technique or willpower." "Yes, Your Highness." The students stood up and said, "You'll be divided into 2 groups, with 3 teams on each side. You'll have a simulated fight. The rules are simple. As long as you can keep your opponent within the crosshair for 10 seconds without being shaken off, it'll be a success. In the past, you've only practiced shooting fixed targets on the ground, but this time, you'll experience what a real aerial duel is like." Everyone was instantly excited. Your Highness." A student raised his hand eagerly. "Speak. There's no bullet in the gun, right?" "Fool." Finkin sneered in a low voice. "Of course not." Tilly shook her head. "To be precise, there's not even a gun. It's just a model mounted on the nose and body of the plane. You don't have to worry about pulling the trigger out of nervousness and shooting your teammates down." Everyone laughed. Besides, shooting in the air is far more complicated than on the ground. It's not guaranteed that you'll hit when you're within the crosshair, so even if there are bullets, you'll probably miss. She shrugged. "Any other questions?" Sure enough, Princess Royal has changed a little. Good thought to himself. If it were the old Princess Royal, she would not have shown such a relaxed expression. Aye. Finken raised his hand. After getting permission, he glanced at the students of the First Army and said, Your Highness, since it's a confrontation, how do we determine the winner? Even if I bite my opponent so hard that he can't fight back, it doesn't mean that he's willing to admit defeat. Although formal students had never been exposed to aerial combat, they had been taught the basic concepts in class. If an aerial knight wanted to defeat an enemy, it should try its best to aim the nose of the plane at the target. This process was called biting. Although there was a gun in the back seat, the shooting angle was limited, so it was mainly used to assist and restrain the enemy's pursuit. It's up to me to judge. Tilly took the hands of the two girls next to her and said, They're guests I've specially invited. I'll be watching your every move. Don't try to bluff your way through. It's Lady Sylvie. The other one seems to be the manager of the sleeping spell. Good heard the students of the First Army whisper behind him. And the trainee phalanx over there isn't just sitting there, the Princess Royal continued. Do you see the two-colored flag in their hands? Looking down from the air, they're arranged in 6 numbers. After you take off, the green flag means normal, and the red flag means you've been shot down. When you notice that your number turns red, you'll have to retreat from the combat zone and return to the airport. Do you understand? Yes. Good, I'll split up now. Surprisingly, the teams were not arranged in order, but there was a special name list. Finally, Good and Finken were assigned to the same team, which was numbered 2. This is the first batch of candidates for boarding training. It's up to you to decide who will pilot and who will shoot. After 15 minutes, teams 1 to 3 will take off first. Don't linger over the airport. The last 3 teams will take off in 5 minutes, and then the training will officially begin. Tilly clapped her hands. Show me everything you've learned. Good could not help clenching his fists. He felt his chest throbbing. Did you notice that? Finken leaned over. Yes, Good replied. The first and second teams were not randomly selected. The first 3 teams were all civilian students, and the last 3 teams were all from the First Army. Her Royal Highness wanted to see which side was stronger. Oh, that's exactly what I wanted. Finken rubbed his nose. I've endured their mockery for a long time. I admit I made a mistake and was punished, but since I'm an empty knight, I'll have to fight in the sky. Good did not care who won or lost. He only hoped that he could fly a little longer each time, so that he could stay in the joy for a little longer. He looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly, as if responding to his heart. Just the thought of being able to hold onto the joystick made him feel a surge of warmth throughout his body. I'll pilot the plane. You just focus on shooting. Finken patted him on the shoulder. You know it's impossible, Good said without hesitation. They looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Finken said helplessly, Okay, the old rules. There was a simple and effective ruling method popular in Neverwinter. No one knew the exact origin of it. Some people said it was used by the Witch Union, while others said it came from His Majesty. Anyway, it was very effective. Rock, paper, scissors. I won. Good withdrew his hand. Finken stared at his fist for a long time and then muttered resentfully. It's just this time. There'll be more training like this in the future. They came to the parking lot of the biplane and boarded the plane according to the serial number. You guys come on. Heinz winked at them from the side of the runway. He was not on the list of the first opponents, so he felt that he was the one who encouraged them. The meaning of his winks was self-evident. Humph, we didn't train for nothing. Finken pulled down his goggles and gave a thumbs up to the ground crew. The ladder was quickly removed. As the joystick rotated rapidly, the propeller at the nose of the plane began to spin slowly. When the piston was started and the throttle was connected, Good felt that the machine under him had come to life. The runway is clear. We can take off now. The ground crew saluted. He raised his arm and returned a standard military salute. Plane number 2 go. Chapter 1263. With a series of roars, the first group of 3 planes left the airport one after another. Which side do you think will win? Tilly asked. Should we bet on the chaos drinks? Sylvie said uncertainly. No, just a guess, Camilla said with relief. The latter seemed relieved. Then I guess the second group. They're all selected from the first army, right? That's right. Tilly nodded. What about you, Camilla? It doesn't matter which side you're on, Your Highness. Camilla Derry sighed. Although this thing is indeed magical, 30 people are equivalent to 10 devil beasts. Even if the number of devil beasts is doubled, it will still have a limited effect on the situation. I'm afraid it's not worth your attention. It's just for now, Tilly said with a smile. When I first came to Neverwinter, there were only a few factories on the riverbank. Now it's almost extended to the port of Shallow. Besides, the devil beasts today haven't changed much since 400 years ago. But these things have changed several times in just half a year. Who knows what will happen in the future? Camilla was silent for a moment. I can't argue with you, but I still have to take care of Sleeping Island. I've been here for too long. Sorry, I made you worry. No, Your Highness. I know, Tilly said frankly. You should have left Neverwinter after the northern expedition, but you stayed because of me. Thank you, Camilla. I'm fine now. The chief butler looked at her for a few seconds and then nodded slightly. I understand, but I can't handle Sleeping Island alone. If you have time, you'd better go back and have a look. The witches who stayed behind are looking forward to your return. They still don't want to come to Neverwinter? Yes. Some people are really hurt too deeply. Although it was only a small part, it also meant that the bloody and cruel past had not completely disappeared. Perhaps it would never disappear. I'll go back after we win the Battle of Divine Will, Tilly said. What if we can't win the war? Just then, the second group of planes roared across the runway. Tilly didn't answer. Instead, she smiled and said, The training has begun. Come on. Hey, do you think Her Royal Highness can really notice the movements of 6 planes at the same time? Finkin roared behind him. The airflow flowed along the fuselage, making whistling sounds. If they were facing the sea breeze, the noise would almost fill the entire cabin. If they didn't shout with all their might, they wouldn't be able to hear each other. That is His Highness' business. His Highness has the final say. Good roared back. At this moment he noticed that 4 of the 6 numbers on the airfield in the distance had turned green, which meant that Team 2 was taking off. Since they couldn't stay in the Academy's airspace, the 3 planes of Team 1 almost unanimously chose to take a detour toward the sea. He could not see the movements of fighter jets 4, 5, and 6, but there was no doubt that their opponents had noticed their route, so they would not immediately follow them. Climbing and accelerating required time, and rashly barging into the advantage zone of the first to fly would put them at a disadvantage. I feel a little nervous when I think Her Highness is watching me. If she can judge the direction of the crosshair, her line of sight must overlap with mine. Doesn't that mean she's in my arms? The plane plummeted a little. Finkin, who had been interrupted, shouted, What the hell are you doing? Can't you control it better? I'm trying to save you, fool. If Her Highness can see the crosshair, do you think she can see your lips? You'll be lucky to go to the mine to mine. Finkin immediately shut his mouth. Good looked around through the gap between the upper wing and the fuselage. He could only vaguely see a black dot moving near the sea-level antenna in the distance, while the other plane was completely out of sight. Apparently, everyone had chosen to fight separately. Apart from some basic concepts, Her Royal Highness had never taught them how to fight in the air. Everything depended on their own judgment. Perhaps even Her Highness herself didn't know. After all, the aerial knight was something that had never existed before, so it was normal for her to start from scratch. Since there was no rule to defend, it was a safe move to choose an open airspace and wait for the opponent to be spotted before making a move. He thought for a moment, then turned around and flew toward the shallow water port. Hey, where are you going? To the west. Go around the factory area. Go around? Isn't it better to wait for them here? But that's just an equal opportunity. Good yelled as he turned around. Think about it, how will they fly? He really didn't care about winning or losing, but the winner would obviously have a longer flight time. How else can they fly? When they get higher and faster, they can come to the sea to find us. That's right. Since they didn't know when the second group would be ready, the first group couldn't get an accurate time to attack, so they were more inclined to defend, just like the knight who had chosen the battlefield and was waiting for the opponent to charge. And there was a way for him to seize the best opportunity to attack first. That was when the second group focused all their attention on the plain above the sea. On open ground, it was difficult to escape detection when a group moved over a large area. But the sky was not the same as the ground. In addition to left and right, there was also up and down. If only we can see them, but they can't see us, we can break the balance. Good said aloud. You don't think they must have less practice than us, do you? Haha, I see. Finkin patted him on the shoulder. I thought I was cunning enough. I didn't expect you to be even more cunning than me. But I like it. Let's do it. Cunning. Are you complimenting me or scolding me? Good rolled his eyes, lowered the nose of the plane, and descended toward the sea. The plane's altitude quickly turned into speed, and the plane disappeared under the sea cliff. At the lowest point, the plane's wheels were almost level with the top of the mast of the ship, and such a low flight attracted the attention of the sailors on the ship. When the plane flew over the shallow water port, there were even cheers and whistles on the dock. But the reaction of the immigrants was obviously different. They all stared at the sky with their mouths agape, looking terrified. There was even a slight disturbance in the queue to get off the ship. Don't fly too low. Otherwise, the police will report us, and we'll have to clean the toilet for another month. Finkin reminded. Don't worry. This distance should be enough. Good slowly pulled back the control stick, and the plane gradually leaped out of the horizon and flew into the factory area. This area was equivalent to the west of the airport, where smoke rose all year round. It was unlikely that the second team would choose to ascend here. Ha! Tilly, who was watching the sky through the eye of magic, let out a soft cry of surprise. That's escaping? Sylvie also noticed the scene. Probably because they can't sit still, Tilly said with a faint smile. With the help of the eye of magic, she could see the entire sky clearly. The 3 biplanes of the second team had all taken off. Unlike the first team, the students of the First Army did not immediately go to the seaside to find their opponents. Instead, they continued to hover in the north until the third plane was ready and flew south in a row. Although it took them a long time to assemble, the 3 biplanes did not stray too far away from each other. Interesting. Tilly thought to herself. She neither taught the students how to fight, nor did she arrange the air, space, and formation for the simulated battle. It could be said that it was their own decision whether to fight separately or in a group. There was no doubt that no matter who won or lost, after today, the flight manual would no longer be blank in terms of combat content. Sure enough, they're not here. After confirming that there was no trace of the opponents, Good immediately stepped on the accelerator to the limit. The plane roared as it climbed high into the sky. It was not until the wind gradually died down that he turned to the southeast. There was no point of reference in the boundless sky. At this time, even if the students of the second team looked over, they would only regard the sesame-sized black dot as a goshawk. The number 2 plane circled around and returned to the Air Knight Academy from the rear. Chapter 1264. Tilly saw that the first flight team had also noticed the approaching opponents. Plane number 1 and plane number 3 spread out in 2 different directions at the same time, seemingly wanting to attack the second team from the flank. The second group was not as orderly as the first group, but they were still aiming for plane 1, which was closest to them. This immediately put the latter in a disadvantageous position, 1 against 3. With the help of her magic eyes, she could clearly see the nervousness on the pilot's face. Since the 2 groups were almost facing each other head-on, as long as the crosshair was firmly locked onto one plane, it was not impossible to trade one plane for one plane. However, the pilot's nervousness affected his movements. After aiming for only 2 or 3 seconds, he stepped on the left pedal and chose to evade. At this time, the distance between the 2 groups was still more than 500 meters, which allowed the second group to adjust their course without any burden, from a head-on attack to a pursuit. In order to get rid of the tail as much as possible, Plane 1 began to perform various maneuvers. Just as Tilly had said at the beginning, the pilot had used all of his life's knowledge. To be able to master the technical requirements of each maneuver in a short period of a month, he must have practiced hard. However, the First Army students were not inferior to him. They were not shaken off by the series of dives and sharp turns, and followed behind the opponent unhurriedly. Coupled with the advantage in numbers, they did not need to keep their noses fixed on the opponent at all times, while the latter had to pay attention to the movements of the three planes at the same time. The numerous maneuvers greatly reduced the altitude and speed of Plane 1. Seeing that there was no way to get rid of them, the pilot gritted his teeth, turned around and flew toward Plane 3, which was still rushing over. At the same time, the second group also found the best opportunity to attack. Plane 6, which had been maintaining a high altitude, suddenly dived and cut diagonally toward the tail of Plane 1 at 7 o'clock. Although the machine gunners saw this and the pilot did his best to save the plane, it was too late for the plane to shake off this round of strafing. 10 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. Tilly nodded in satisfaction. Square 1 raised the red flag. At this time, Plane 3 finally arrived. They were facing Plane 6, which was climbing, and Plane 4 and Plane 5, which were in good condition. The situation seemed to be overwhelmingly unfavorable. That was if Plane 2, which had been at the highest point, was not included. She cast her gaze toward the sky above the academy. "I see them." Finken leaned half of his body out of the seat and shouted. "Wait, the number 1 plane seems to have been shot down." "Are you sure?" "The number 1 on Sosnovka military base has turned red, but they haven't left the battlefield yet." "That's only because they haven't realized it yet." Good frowned. His teammates had held on for a shorter time than he had expected. "What about Plane 3? If I'm not mistaken, that's the Black Duck coming from afar." Finken yelled. "Buddy, they're in a mess now. It's time to join the battle. Wait a little longer. Look behind you. Can you see the sun?" He turned around and immediately closed his eyes. "Hey, you are indeed the pilot I chose. Now that I'm facing you, I can hardly open my eyes. You were the one who lost the rock-paper-scissors game." Good shook his head helplessly and pressed down on the joystick. "In that case, let's go." "Yay!" Finken yelled. The roar of the star-shaped engine drowned out the sound of the wind. The entire plane seemed to be trembling in the violent airflow. The feeling of falling against the wind always made Good's blood boil. He was a charging knight, and he was charging through the entire sky. His teammates on Plane 3 focused on the second group of planes, which was the slowest, while the other two began to chase Plane 3 away. It was not until they dashed out of the golden sunlight and pounced on the third group like thunder that they noticed the presence of their new opponents. Good noticed that if the other two planes had ignored their teammates and focused on shooting down Plane 3, they would have succeeded by now. It was this consideration that gave him the best opportunity to shoot. It was too late for the two planes to realize that something was wrong. After quickly flying over Plane 4, Good immediately switched his target to the plane marked with the number 5. He had already locked on to the plane marked with the number 5 when he dived. Although it was a trick and did not mean that he could really shoot down Plane 4 at that distance, this was the rule set by the Princess Royal. He believed that Her Highness had seen everything. His teammates could be forced to withdraw from the confrontation training at any time, so he had to hurry. The 4 biplanes were entangled with each other. The situation became very tense, especially for Plane 5. Good could even see the ferocious expression of the shooter on the other side of the plane. Although his plane had lost its concealment ability, it still had the advantage in speed. After several rounds of competition, Good finally managed to get a long time to aim. Just when he thought it was about time, Finken reported the result from the back seat. "The flag of Plane 5 has turned red." Plane 3 was also eliminated almost at the same time. Plane 6 and themselves were the only ones still holding the green flag at the airport. Plane 3 could not get enough time to aim, probably because the 2 planes of the second group put too much pressure on their teammates. Plane 6 soon appeared behind them after taking a breather. "What the hell are those guys doing? They didn't even shoot down one plane." Finken cursed as he turned the machine gun. "Now it's 3 against 1. Who asked us to use them as bait in the first place?" Good said casually. "Of course, there's another possibility. Plane 6 is a tough opponent." His speculation was soon confirmed. No matter which direction he turned, Plane 6 followed him closely, and did not give him any chance to shake off. He had to move, or Plane 6 would definitely get 10 seconds earlier than Finkin. Damn it. His companion's voice was obviously more anxious than before. Can't you fly a little faster? I've tried my best. We'll be killed sooner or later if this goes on. Think of something. How about hiding in the port area? There's a sailboat there for cover. If we hit a refugee boat, whether it's us or not, what do you think will happen to us? We'll probably be shot to death. Finkin's morale immediately dropped. In that case, forget it. At least we won't be the first to be eliminated. Unless there's wind to send us up, I don't think we'll be able to win this round. There's wind. Good was a little startled. An idea flashed through his mind. You're right. I've got an idea. Huh. Do you remember the upwind on the cliff? The sea breeze blowing from the swirling sea to the land was not constant, especially on the side near the coast. Due to the obstruction of the cliff, the airflow would spread along the obstacle, and part of it would become a fast-rising gale. As long as one stood on the edge of the cliff, one could hear the rhythmic whistling from time to time. Finkin's face froze when he realized what Good was referring to. Are you crazy? Let's not talk about whether we can get the upwind or not. If we get too close to the cliff, we'll be doomed if you shake your hand. The area of upwind was very small. Once they left the edge of the cliff, they would immediately be blown away by the sea breeze. Also affected by the uneven cliff, the direction of the wind was also more complicated. In terms of difficulty, it was more difficult to do so than to shuttle between the sails of a sailboat. I don't have to take that risk. I just need to do it. It's like wasting water. Good quickly lowered his altitude and flew in the direction of the Aerial Knight Academy. Plane number 6 hesitated for a moment before it also began to speed down. How do you know when the strong wind will come? Finkin asked suspiciously. The ships carrying the refugees will tell me. He controlled the biplane to descend and let plane number 6 close the distance between them. After making a big turn, his path overlapped with the coastline, and he gradually approached the ground. In the eyes of other students, this action was no different from admitting defeat. Although plane number 2 was still maintaining a high speed, it had nowhere to run. Their opponents followed closely behind them and firmly bit onto them. A few seconds. Good roared. I guess 8 seconds. 654. Finkin gritted his teeth. During this time, Good kept a part of his attention on a ship sailing to the shallow port not far ahead. However, what he was looking at was not the flag or the sails, but the bird standing on the mast. The flag and the sails were always fluttering, and it was impossible to tell the strength of the wind. Only these seabirds, who had been with the wind for a long time, could capture the strength of the wind. As if sensing something, a flock of seabirds spread their wings, descended from the tall mast, and flew toward the cliff. This scene was very similar to the gliding seagull. He had long observed that the birds seemed to be very interested in this kind of entertainment. From the ship to the cliff, even if their wings did not move, they could still fly with the wind. Just as the flock of birds was about to reach the edge of the cliff, Good suddenly pulled the plane up. Under normal circumstances, this operation would cause the plane to tilt too high, and it would be easy to fall into a stall. However, at this moment, the flock of birds suddenly rose, as if there was an invisible hand holding them up from below. The wind rose. In an instant, Good heard an ear-piercing whistling sound. A gust of wind suddenly appeared and slammed into the wing of the plane. With a violent tremor, plane number 2 accelerated again, and miraculously rushed straight up, and then turned upside down. The whole world was turned upside down. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He saw the unprepared plane number 6 pass below his head. The pilot raised his head and showed a surprised expression. In the distance, the seabirds were leaping out of the horizon, and their white wings seemed to form a staircase connecting the sky. He did not lie to His Highness. Since the day he entered the academy, his love for flying had increased every day. It was this feeling of flying freely that made him immersed in it, and he could not extricate himself. This was the thing that left the deepest impression on Good among all the things he had learned. Chapter 1265. What an exciting duel! Sylvie could not help but exclaim. Indeed. Tilly curled up the corners of her mouth and glanced at the butler mockingly. Even Camilla, who had been absent-minded all this while, focused her attention at the last moment. Her eyes never strayed from the battle between the two biplanes. When the second biplane took advantage of the wind to shake off its tail, the outcome was already decided. But at this point, winning or losing was no longer important. She saw what she wanted to see. For example, in a one-on-one battle, the side with the advantage in numbers would have a great advantage. They would have more freedom in allocating height and speed until they could force their opponent into a corner. But this number did not simply refer to the sum of the forces invested by both sides. She then deduced that by changing formations and maneuvering, even if the side was at a disadvantage overall, they could still gain the opportunity to outnumber their opponent. If the target was the more agile devil beasts, cooperation would undoubtedly be more important. In addition, she also noticed that the side at a higher altitude had a greater chance of winning. If they could drag the enemy into a dogfight, then the formation cruising in the air could launch an ambush. That might be the best opening. As for how many people to form into a team, and how to change their formation during a firefight, that would be the next part of her research. But Tilly also knew that this kind of training was ultimately just for biplanes. If she wanted to confirm the contents of the next part of the flight manual, she would have to go to the actual battlefield to test it out. She was gratified that this batch of students was growing faster than she had expected. At this rate, when the Fire of Heaven was officially produced, Air Knight would be able to test his skills in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. Of course, she would not miss this battle of vengeance. The unicorn only existed as a training plane. The new ride that her brother promised should already be in production, right? When the training was over, she might as well go to the castle and remind him to hurry up. At this moment, the last plane landed steadily on the airfield. Both the students and the apprentice phalanxes burst into enthusiastic applause. "Now I know why you divided them into two distinct camps," Sylvie sighed softly. "Although I did plan to do so, I didn't expect the results to be so good. I thought it would take at least 10 days to half a month to see this scene." Tilly smiled and waved her hand to summon Eagle Face, handing him a new list. "Now that everyone is back, let's get ready for the next round. Give me a little more time." She looked to the north. "I will soon make the devil pay for his blood." Woo! The drawn-out sound of a horn came from outside the porthole, indicating that there was a meeting up ahead. Ever since he entered the territory of Grey Castle, he had heard similar noises more frequently. Manfeld could hear them almost every hour. But now this interval had been shortened to half an hour, or even less. He had never heard that the Kingdom of Grey Castle was a country that was well developed in navigation. In the general impression of the nobles in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, although the Kingdom of Wolfheart was large, it was not rich in resources. It was about the same as the Kingdom of Wolfheart. In terms of richness, the Kingdom of Dawn was the most enviable. But now it seemed that this was not the case. But when he thought about it, it was normal. News could be spread from one village to another, not to mention across two kingdoms. After all, the Kingdom of Dawn had defeated the Church, which was enough to prove that the king was very powerful. But he did not know how long it would take for them to reach the legendary city of Neverwinter. Thinking of this, Manfeld yawned in boredom. The long sea journey was easier than he had imagined. After the ship arrived at the northern port of the Kingdom of Dawn, they did not set off for the next port immediately. Instead, they cleaned up the crowded cabins. Those who were seriously seasick took the land route, and the others were given enough time to rest. The people of the Kingdom of Dawn even built a large number of temporary residences in the dock area, which seemed to be well prepared. They cooperated perfectly with Grey Castle. If it were not for the fluttering flag on the wall, Manfeld would have thought that this was the territory of the King of Grey Castle. Apparently, the two kingdoms had reached some kind of agreement to transfer them. But Manfeld did not know how much King Roland Wimbledon had to pay for it. Thanks to this move, the bruises on his body healed quickly. In about a week, he was completely healed, and he did not take the magic pills given to him by the two women. I wonder how they are now. Manfeld touched the wrapped meatball in his arms, and could not help but think of the two women. Although they were rather haggard and dirty at that time, he could still catch a glimmer of light in their dry hair. If they took care of themselves, they should be fine. He hoped that the two women could arrive safely. He thought that if they could get rid of their status as slaves, they could probably cut off their gloomy past and start a new life. Suddenly, Manfeld heard a strange buzzing sound, as if something was flying over his head. Then he heard messy footsteps coming from the cabin above. It's so noisy. What the hell are those guys doing? Can't they let us sleep? Someone around him immediately complained. Manfeld, however, had an idea. He climbed down from the bed and looked out of the porthole. If he heard it right, those people were walking in the same direction as the buzzing sound. The blue sky and the boundless sea outside were still the same. There seemed to be no change, except that a few big birds were chasing and playing. Wait, what are those birds? Manfeld rubbed his eyes and could not believe what he saw. When the birds flew perpendicular to the sea, their sharp wings and tails did not look like normal creatures at all. When they flew over the ship again, he confirmed that he was not hallucinating because he had been cooped up for too long. Those things were indeed not alive, but seemed to be made of metal. What was more incredible was that he could vaguely see people sitting on them. Manfeld opened his mouth and tried to shout, only to find that he couldn't utter a word. How could this happen? Even though he had gradually accepted the existence of the First Army and the steamships, and had some expectations of the prosperity of Greycastle's King's City, this scene was still far beyond the scope of his understanding. They were both kingdoms, but he had a feeling that Greycastle and the Kingdom of Wolfheart did not belong to the same world. No, not only the Kingdom of Wolfheart, but also the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Dawn. Otherwise, he would have heard about it before. Since when had the other kingdoms been left so far behind? While Manfeld was lost in his thoughts, the ship blew the horn again, but this time it was much longer, usually to remind the migrants that they were about to dock. Chapter 1266. Line up. Don't push, shouted a man in black uniform from Greycastle as he shuttled through the crowd. Look at your number plate and find the corresponding checkpoint after you disembark. Don't go the wrong way. Manfeld, who had not recovered from the shock, was pushed onto the deck by the crowd. He saw a panoramic view of the busy port. It was definitely the largest port he had ever seen. The long dock stretched along the coast, and he could not see the end of it. Different from his previous impression of the damp and decaying port, the ground here was paved with a layer of white bricks, which looked neat and clean. Ships of all sizes came and went. Even the busiest port in the Kingdom of Dawn could not compare with this. This should have been a spectacular sight, as could be seen from the exclamations of the people around him. However, for Manfeld, it was just another unimportant thing in his confused mind. Manfeld looked back at the direction where the ships came from every 3 steps, hoping to see the Iron Bird again. It was almost an instinctive reaction, as if he was looking for evidence and comfort to prove that he was not hallucinating. Unfortunately, when he stepped onto the pier, the unimaginable thing did not appear again. There was a faint sense of loss in his heart. Please take out your number plate and enter the checkpoint according to the first 3 digits. Many people on the dock shouted with strange metal pipes in their hands. The pipes seemed to have the ability to amplify sound. Their words could be heard clearly even in the noisy crowd. After that, follow the guide's instructions and complete the immigration check. Welcome to the King's City of Greycastle. Welcome to become one of us. Manfeld shook his head hard, trying to get rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind and focus on what he saw. What a strange welcome. Manfeld could not help but think that the people here all knew that they did not voluntarily move to Greycastle, and what Greycastle had done in the Kingdom of Wolfheart was quite forceful. However, Manfeld still felt a little relieved when he heard this. The originally towering rock wall suddenly caved in, forming a natural checkpoint. The densely packed migrants formed a long line and slowly passed through the checkpoint. There were more than 10,000 people gathered at the pier, and it was obvious that the migrants were not only from the Kingdom of Wolfheart. To be able to mobilize so many people in such a short time and project the will of the ruler to the other 3 kingdoms, this was probably the best portrayal of the power of Greycastle. Suddenly, the team stopped moving. Manfeld heard a commotion behind him. Not only the outsiders, but even the men in black who were maintaining order were surprised. He turned around and saw a huge ship without sails slowly entering the harbor. It had a slender body, and its entire body seemed to be made of metal. There were no visible wheels on either side, and the towering and straight trunk looked incomparably mighty. Such a ship would be the center of attention no matter where it was. However, it was obvious that what truly surprised the people of Grey Castle wasn't the ship itself, but its condition. Are these people crazy? They actually used iron to build a ship. Someone whispered. Don't they know that iron will rust in water? Maybe the king of Grey Castle just wants to show off his wealth. But this iron ship is really impressive. I didn't know that such a heavy thing could float on the water before I saw a stone ship. What's the point of showing off for half a month? I've been to the sea many times and seen all kinds of situations. Salt water is much more corrosive than you can imagine. An ordinary paint can't protect it for long. Look, this is what happens when you act recklessly. Indeed, there were black and brown rust spots all over the body of the steel ship. The surface, which should have been bright and clean, was full of bumps and hollows. The damage was very striking, and it formed a sharp contrast with the white pier. The mast above the ship's head was even broken into several pieces and scattered weakly on the front deck. Coupled with the sluggish movement when it approached the shore, it looked like a sea beast in its twilight years. However, did His Majesty Roland Wimbledon build this ship just to show off? Seeing that the guards in black quickly opened up a path for the sailors on the ship, Manfeld vaguely felt that things were not that simple. The commotion soon subsided, and the queue resumed its flow. When it was his turn, the inspector simply checked his name and number, and let him pass. When there were more than 30 people, a man came forward and said, I'm Matt, a clerk in the administrative office of Neverwinter. I'm in charge of your accommodation for the time being. I believe you must have a lot of questions. Don't worry, I'll explain to you in detail on the way to the residential area. Now please drink the purifying water on the table. It can cure the demonic plague on you. If not, it's also a cup of sweet drink. Do we have to follow you? Someone questioned. We're now members of Grey Castle, so we can go wherever we want, right? Only after you get your identity cards will you be considered as His Majesty's subjects. Matt shook his head. For an ordinary person, it'll take 1 to 2 years of hard work. And during this period, you must not violate the laws of Grey Castle. However, you're all special talents with special skills. As long as you pass the self-examination, you'll immediately become an official resident of the city. However, the inspector doesn't always have time, and there are many applicants, so you'll have to wait for another 2 or 3 days. Self-examination? Isn't it just an identity examination? You'll know after you experience it yourself. Matt smiled. Compared with your past, the examination focuses more on your present and future. I also passed the same examination to become a clerk in the administrative office. Now, after drinking the water, please follow me, Manfeld thought to himself. This must be the examination that will never lie mentioned by the coachman. Along the way, Matt did answer many questions that the migrants were most concerned about, such as what kind of jobs they would be able to do in the future, what kind of treatment they would receive, and so on. At least according to the policy announced by the King of Grey Castle, there would be no difference in treatment between the migrants and the natives after they had obtained official identities. Matt even used himself as an example and vividly described his journey from the initial panic to the gradual adaptation, which calmed everyone down a lot. When they entered the temporary residential area in the suburbs, a shrill laughter suddenly caught everyone's attention. Manfeld looked in the direction of the laughter and saw a group of men dressed like refugees surrounding a woman and approaching her. Many people around them noticed this, but none of them stepped forward to stop them. Some people were still incessantly jeering, and some even revealed an eager expression. Damn it! Why do I have to encounter such things everywhere I go? He had thought that Neverwinter would be different. Manfeld frowned. Did anyone inform the black-clothed guards? According to Matt's introduction, the black-clothed guards, who were called policemen, had replaced the original patrol team. Manfeld did not know if they were reliable, but he did not have a better idea. However, no one did anything. I advise you to mind your own business, young man. We'll have to stay here for a few days before we move to the inner city. That's right. If we're hated by these scumbags, we'll be the ones to suffer. Manfeld wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he looked at Matt and said, I'll go buy some time. Call the security officer here. To his surprise, Matt grabbed his hand and shook his head slightly. Manfeld's heart was filled with disappointment. Chapter 1267. Excuse me, please make way. Manfeld squeezed into the crowd and immediately attracted the attention of the refugees. Who are you? Someone blocked his way, looking displeased. Even if you can't hold it in any longer, you should at least wait until I'm done. He was also the one who laughed sinisterly at the beginning. His mind raced. It seemed that the other party was most likely the leader of this group. It was impossible to take away a woman in front of a dozen gangsters, and he didn't have any weapons. His only chance was to take down the leader first, and then take advantage of the chaos to escape. I'm here to remind you that someone has already informed the guards in black. If you don't run now, it will be too late. Manfeld spread out his hands and pretended to be calm. He took 2 steps closer to the leader and winked at the woman, hoping that she would understand that he was not on the same side as these hooligans. However, the woman did not respond. Instead, she tilted her head and looked confused. Damn it. Doesn't this guy understand the situation he is in? How could he still be so calm even at this stage? What black-clothed guards? Aren't they just patrols? The leader grinned. It's hard to say who they'll help. You are still a rookie, aren't you? Ha ha ha. Judging from his appearance, he must be from a rich family. In the end, didn't they end up like us? If you know what's good for you, get out of here before the boss gets angry. The crowd burst into laughter. At this moment, Manfeld made his move. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the chest of the leader, who had let down his guard. Then he punched the leader and knocked him to the ground. Compared to Mike McKinley's 2 well-trained servants, these hooligans were much easier to deal with. From the moment Manfeld made his move to the moment he fell, the leader did not even make a sound. The crowd burst into an uproar. Damn it. You're courting death. Save the boss. Manfeld felt several blows on his back and legs, but he could not care less. He reached out his hand to the woman and said, Come with me. Something unexpected happened. The woman did extend her hand, but she didn't put it in his palm. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the encirclement. Hey you. Manfeld was about to ask if the woman was mistaken, when he saw the electric sparks bouncing on the woman's body. Wait a minute. Lightning? Before they could come back to their senses, the tiny electric light instantly turned into an electric arc, and the blue light suddenly flourished. Like a long snake, it pounced on the gangsters who rushed up, piercing them one by one like skewers. In front of such an incredible scene, the perpetrator had almost no power to resist. He only had time to let out a short scream before his body stiffened and fell to the ground. That's enough. The woman clapped her hands and said in a relaxed manner, Are you? Manfeld was dumbfounded. That's right, I'm a witch. The woman admitted her identity very calmly. But shouldn't all witches be incomparably beautiful, have an impressive figure, and every move of theirs filled with charm? He looked at the woman carefully for a moment, but the feeling he got from her did not match the description at all. Not to mention her appearance, it was already a compliment that she was ordinary. She was also quite skinny, and from the back, she looked no different from a little girl. Then what should we do with them? Manfeld pointed at the gangsters on the ground. I'll contact the police department to deal with the aftermath. Don't worry, I only used about 10% of my strength, so they'll be unconscious for half an hour at most. However, the mine and the furnace area won't let them go so easily. I think they'll have to stay there for at least half a month. Manfeld found that he could not follow the woman's words at all. From her tone, it seemed that this conflict was all part of her plan. By the way, I'm Sharon. Can you tell me your name? The woman's question interrupted his thoughts. Well, Manfeld, you're the first person I've met to stand up for me. Why? Manfeld rubbed the place where he had been kicked. Isn't it a matter of course to stop the crime? I just didn't expect that you didn't need my help at all. A matter of course? Sharon curled her lips. If everyone thought that way, Those people who started the fight wouldn't have run away. But there's always someone who understands that. In the history books, the nobles were all transformed from such people. They brought order to the chaotic world and paved a way through thorns. You're right. There's always someone who knows what's right and what's wrong. Sharon smiled. You're a new immigrant to Neverwinter, right? Do you want to join the police department? You mean to become a man in black? Yes. The main responsibility of the police is to crack down on crime, maintain order, and protect the residents. I think it's a good job for you. Besides, they don't have to wear black all the time. For example, now. Manfeld was stunned. Well, I have to report to the administrative office. The receptionist is waiting for you. Sharon waved her hand and walked toward the inner city. Now you know why I didn't let you go, right? Matt smiled at Manfeld when he returned to the team. Well, what's going on? Manfeld asked in confusion. It's an effective way to deter crime, Matt explained as he walked. Originally, the temporary housing area in the suburbs wasn't this chaotic, at least when I lived there. But since the number of immigrants increased several times, the public security has been severely reduced. Among all the crimes, the violence against vulnerable women is the most prominent. Of course, I'm not saying that you're to blame, because there are many refugees from other places in Greycastle. Because there are so many of them, it's hard for the police to take care of them all. More importantly, if you don't call the police after the crime has happened, the criminals may have already caused irreparable harm. Isn't it obvious? When a large number of scums are gathered together, even the best place will become a mess, someone muttered. In my opinion, the King of Greycastle shouldn't have accepted these unknown people at all. Matt shook his head. His Majesty wants everyone to be useful, especially in the battle of divine will. However, this idea didn't come from His Majesty. It was the witches who suggested it. For them, it can consume magic power, kill time, and maintain public security. It's killing two birds with one stone. Kill time. Manfeld could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. It's proven that this method is very effective. Any seemingly weak refugee can launch a fatal counterattack, which is enough to dissuade those who are interested in it. Besides, the police will never let go of a criminal, and repeat offenders will think twice about the consequences. After the two parties work together, the public security here is much better than before. I see. Manfeld said thoughtfully. It seemed that the men in black in Neverwinter were completely different from the patrols in the past. Instead, they were more like the knight in Manfeld's mind. If Sharon did not lie to him, this might be an ideal job. After arriving at the temporary housing and being assigned rooms, Matt waved goodbye to them. I'll come back tomorrow and show you the history and characteristics of Neverwinter, which will be very helpful for your future life and integration. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Manfeld was about to ask about the requirements to become a police officer, but he somehow changed his words. On my way here, I saw some giant iron birds. I wonder if you've seen them. I've seen them. If you stay in Neverwinter for a long time, you'll know that they're not rare. Before Manfeld could finish, Matt replied with a smile. It's indeed a little shocking when you see them for the first time, but you'll get used to it. If you're talented enough, you might even be able to fly them into the sky. Are you serious? Manfeld's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1268. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Mr. Sandy Osaka has returned from the swirling sea, and they seem to be in big trouble. The guard's sudden report made Roland pause for a moment. He had returned to his office after the meeting on expanding the industrial scale, intending to continue perfecting the blueprints that he was going to use next. However, this unexpected news completely interrupted his train of thought. The so-called Sandy Osaka was Thunder's alias. Where is he now? Roland abruptly rose to his feet and asked. He's in the castle hall. He said he wants to see you immediately. Bring him in. Roland ordered. Also, ask the kitchen to prepare an afternoon tea. Yes, I'll do it right away. Sean turned around and quickly disappeared through the door. Should I inform Lightning? Nightingale asked worriedly. Roland shook his head and said, Since he can come to the castle, he should be fine. Let's ask him about the situation first. According to the date, Thunder had only been out to sea for a little more than half a year. Including the return journey, it only took him 3 months. Considering that they had stayed on the Shadow Islands for a while, the time spent on the road was even shorter. This was far less than the explorer's original plan. According to the explorer's original plan, this voyage would take at least 1 to 1.5 years. If possible, Thunder even wanted to see what was at the end of the swirling sea, and whether the continent he saw in the ruins was in the depths of the sea. It was obvious that some unforeseen event had occurred that caused this expedition that had been prepared for a long time to end halfway. Roland could not help but look out of the window. Could it be related to the bloody moon? Soon Thunder, who had changed his alias to Sandy, was led into the office by the guard. It was obvious that he was really disheveled this time. He did not even have time to put on his fake beard, and the ostentatious feather decorations were almost gone. If Lightning saw him now, she would probably recognize him. But at the very least, his entire body was still in perfect condition. To Roland, this was enough. "Your Majesty, it's nice to see you again." Thunder put his hand on his chest and bowed. "I almost thought I would never come back." Roland personally poured him a glass of cold and delicious chaos drink. "What happened? Since you've gathered the best navigators of the fjords, I don't think an ordinary storm or tsunami would make you say that. There are signs of storms and tsunamis, but there won't be thousands of sea ghosts." Thunder seemed to still have a lingering fear at this moment. "What's more, we will not only encounter sea ghosts, but even more terrifying monsters." Roland felt as if he could feel their despair as he listened to their narration. Countless sea ghosts swarmed the ships, their backs churning as if boiling the seawater, and the slower ships were mercilessly dragged into hell. And among the sea ghosts, there were terrifying ships of flesh and blood. The acid they spat could fall several kilometers away. Just a little bit of it would cause one's skin to split open. Even steel and wood could not resist this kind of corrosion. Even if they sailed at full speed, the expedition team could not widen the distance between the two sides. Sky-Sea Realm. His face was as gloomy as water. "Your Majesty, what's that?" Thunder asked. "It's what the demons call another civilization." Roland slowly told him the information that the demons were fighting on 2 fronts. The rib-like vault, the body of the ship made of flesh and organs, and the ability to float on the water like a ship and dive into the sea. These features were not much different from what he had seen in the relics of the gods. "You mean we've trespassed into their territory?" "Maybe. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the appearance of the bloody moon made them more active and expanded their patrol range." Roland changed the topic. "What happened after that? How did the expedition team get out of danger? In fact, it's not that we've shaken them off, but that they've had internal strife," Thunder said with a wry smile. "Internal strife? Indeed. The enemies chased us day and night as if they never knew fatigue. By the time we approached the Sealine, we had lost more than half of our ships. Most of the sailors who were still alive were on the verge of collapse because they could not rest for a long time. Only the Snow Wind you built still had energy to spare. After all, she didn't need to adjust the sails and course all the time." Just when everyone was about to lose hope, a larger sea monster suddenly rushed out of the water and entangled one of the sea monsters. It looked like 2 flesh and blood monsters were biting each other. Although they were both monsters, the former was obviously stronger. The appendages and tentacles that extended from its body quickly tore the latter into pieces. After that, both the sea ghosts and the other sea monsters stopped chasing and surrounded the two as if they were stunned. "We took the opportunity to cross the Sealine and escape back to the fjords." Roland exhaled a long breath. "Fortunately, luck is on your side. It seems that the name of the ship is not in vain." The name of the ship? "No, it's nothing." He waved his hand. "What's your next plan?" Thunder's face showed unprecedented fatigue. "To be honest, the loss of the ship is secondary. The expedition has scared most people out of their wits. Now the fjords is filled with a strange atmosphere. The sailors who have been fighting on the sea all their lives now turn pale when they look at the east side of the sea. I guess no one will dare to board the ship to the shadow waters for a long time." Roland was silent. This wasn't surprising at all. Just as he had said, storms and tsunamis could be predicted ahead of time, and brave navigators would always be able to find a way to dance with them. However, this type of experience where one had no ability to resist and could only flee for their lives couldn't even be considered an adventure. The big chambers of commerce also asked me to tell you that they want to buy a piece of land in Grey Castle at a high price as their preparatory shelter. Thunder sighed. After all, no one knows whether they will come back or not. The sea has always been a natural stronghold for the fjord's people, but if the enemy can come and go freely in the sea, the whole fjord's island is equivalent to an undefended empty city. A year or two ago, he had planned to use the fjords as the last stronghold for the survivors to live the rest of their lives after the defeat, but now the situation was completely reversed. If he had just arrived in Border Town and had less than 300 golden dragons, this kind of deal would have been absolutely desirable. But now, paper money had begun to circulate in the territory, and the so-called high price was no longer an attractive condition. What do you think? I say, if they want to establish a country within a country, they'd better give up as soon as possible, Thunder shrugged and said. You'll never allow them to establish a new island in Grey Castle. Roland laughed, thinking that Roland was indeed the most outstanding explorer in the fjords. If they just want to survive, rather than for the privilege accumulated over generations, Grey Castle will always welcome them. I'll tell you the truth, Your Majesty. You must be exhausted from the voyage. I've prepared afternoon tea. You can take a hot bath first, and then tell me what you've seen and heard on the way. It'll take several days to repair the snow wind. You can return to the fjords after you've recovered your strength. Thank you, Your Majesty, Thunder said with a hand on his chest. Just as he was about to leave, Roland suddenly stopped him. By the way, about lightning. Are you still going to hide it? Thunder opened his mouth, but for a moment he was speechless. You said you'd meet her after this expedition. Although this trip wasn't very successful, now that the Sky Sea realm has occupied more than half of the sea, and the people of the fjords are in a state of panic, you probably won't be able to explore for a long time. Roland held his chin and said, I need people to fight the demons, and Lightning also wants to see her father alive. In that case, how about staying here after the trivial matters are settled? Chapter 1269. Do you think he'll agree? Roland asked Nightingale after Thunder's footsteps faded away. I don't know, Nightingale replied slowly. But he meant what he said. Roland nodded and did not say anything else. Apart from Lightning, Thunder also had his own reasons for staying. As a famous explorer in the fjords, Thunder was the ideal candidate to attract people from the fjords to join him, or to serve as the core of the fleet. According to Agatha, the Red Mist should have covered more than half of the kingdom of Everwinter by now. When the first army arrived, even the border of the kingdom of Wolfheart would not be spared. Under such circumstances, rescuing people along the coastline or attacking from the flanks would be necessary. The evacuation of the northernmost port showed that a powerful fleet could relieve a lot of pressure on the ground forces. Although the merchant ships seemed to be moving in an orderly manner, it was impossible for them to enter the Red Mist area and fight the demons. It was not difficult for Neverwinter to gather a few large ships, but they lacked well-trained sailors and people who could command the fleet. If Thunder was willing to stay, these problems would undoubtedly be solved. However, Roland also knew that he could not force Thunder to agree. He could only wait for Thunder to think it over. When he picked up his pen and was about to continue his work, a telephone suddenly rang. Judging from the line, the caller was from the Witch Building in the Castle District. Hello. Your Majesty, this is Vendi. A familiar voice came from the other end of the line. The Shallowport's checkpoint reported that they found a witch. Excuse me, sir, where are you taking us? Thylane asked cautiously while holding Momo's hand. Not long ago, they had followed the long queue to the checkpoint like the other refugees. However, when they entered the registration area, they were asked to leave the queue by a man in black and entered a small, seemingly transparent but tightly guarded room. The two of them immediately tensed up. It wasn't that she hadn't heard that some cities would screen out some people for special interrogation when checking refugees. If they couldn't come up with the corresponding benefits, they would suffer greatly. However, the other party didn't do anything. He just left them in the room for a while, and asked them some strange questions before letting them out. Another black-clothed man led them to the inner city. "You don't have to be so polite. Just call me Joseph," the man in black said in an easygoing tone. "You're witches, right?" Thylane was shocked. She didn't expect them to point out her identity so straightforwardly. More surprisingly, how did they know that she had magic power? She thought she had disguised herself well enough. Why do you say that?" "I don't know anything about magic. The witches told me." Surf scratched the back of his head and said, "I heard that they can sense the presence of magic through a special stone. As for where to take you, of course, it's the witch's residence. You must be exhausted from the journey. Rest assured, Lady Vendi will take good care of you." Thylane and Momo exchanged a look and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Firstly, they didn't expect that Neverwinter had a way to identify witches. If the church and the nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart could do that, they would not have survived until now. Secondly, from the other side's tone, it seemed that witches were cooperating with ordinary people without any barriers. Their master had mentioned the city in the westernmost part of Grey Castle, and its ruler, Roland Wimbledon. During the journey before they boarded the ship, they had also heard all kinds of discussions and rumors. However, there was a huge difference between the two rumors. One described the king of Grey Castle as a cruel and arrogant man who recruited witches to satisfy his evil desires, while the other praised the achievements of the new Grey Castle, and believed that the witches in the new Grey Castle were living a normal life. It was the second kind of rumor that made them decide to move to the south. However, they were thousands of miles away from each other, so they didn't know what the real situation was. Therefore, they had planned to hide their identities for a while, and decide their next step after they found out the truth. They didn't expect that they would be exposed as soon as they arrived in Neverwinter. Fortunately, the people here didn't seem to treat witches as aliens anymore. When they arrived at the periphery of the Grey Castle district, a red-haired woman and two little girls walked over with a smile. "Leave the rest to me." "Yes, Lady Vendi." Surf saluted and waved at them before he turned around and left quickly. Thylane secretly looked at the woman called Vendi. "My name is Vendi, and I'm in charge of the Neverwinter Witch Union. These two are my assistants, Belle and Grey Rabbit," Vendi said with a smile. "Can you tell me your names? Although it's Thylane and Momo on the list, I'd like to hear it from you in person." Thylane felt like she was bathing in a spring breeze. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to her in such a gentle tone. However, Vendi looked more like a noble than those so-called nobles. Not only was she mature and attractive, but she also had a different temperament. She looked like a character out of a painting. "I'm Thylane," she said in a low voice. "Momo." Her companion said her name. "They're both good names." Vendi took their hands and said, "Welcome to Neverwinter. From now on, this will be your new home. Come on, let me show you where you'll live from now on." After passing through the fence and the courtyard, Thylane found that the Lord's castle was not the tallest building here. Behind it, there was an even larger building. There was a spacious garden and lawn between the two of them, and a few beautiful women were gathered together and chatting. Their faces were brimming with relaxed and carefree expressions. Perhaps his dream life was also like this, right? "Are they also witches?" Momo couldn't help asking. "Yes." Vendi nodded. "You'll see more of them after work." After work. It means work is over," Belle explained. "In Neverwinter, witches, like everyone else, have their own work to do every day. Then the little girl curled her lips and said, "There are always diligent and lazy witches. They're just like ordinary people." "Didn't your sister tell you that I have sharp ears?" A woman with pointy ears looked at them and walked over with a smile. Sister Lorger, I'm not talking about you." Belle hurriedly waved her hands and said, "I'm talking about." "Oh, a new member of the League?" Another person quickly came over and said, "Hello, I'm Mystery Moon, the head of the Neverwinter Detective Group. No matter what abilities you have, you can become a member of the detective group. Are you interested?" "I'm talking about this one." Belle covered her face helplessly. "Oh, did you happen to introduce me to them?" Mystery Moon said with her hands on her hips. Remember, the detective group relies on brains, not abilities to solve problems. If someone asks you to join the exploration group, don't say yes. They only care about abilities and ignore the inner qualities, like this Miss Wolf girl. I'll beat you up. Lorger bared her fangs. See, this is proof. Mystery Moon hurriedly made a defensive posture. How embarrassing. Well, can I go back to reading? The other witches asked in a low voice. Thylane was dumbfounded. Chapter 1270. Wendy patted Thylane's head with a smile. Mystery Moon used to be even more timid than you. Even though she's like this now. Stop. Mystery Moon hurriedly begged. That's all in the past. Oh, really? Lorger pricked up her ears. At that time, she only dared to come to me secretly when everyone was asleep. If she told me everything, it would take her a whole day. Stop. Mystery Moon shouted. Tell me what you want, Sister Vendy. Don't worry. I won't tell you anything. But Scroll complained to me yesterday that the administrative office is so busy that no one has been cleaning up the archives for a long time. I'm going now. Detective group, please excuse me. She winked at the two witches before she left. See you tonight. Humph. The wolf girl curled her lips and followed the witches out of the courtyard. I'll go and help. I'm a kind-hearted person. After the witches were gone, Grey Rabbit elbowed Belle and muttered in a low voice. I think Sister Lorger followed them because she didn't want to be labeled as a lazy person. Is that so? Pfft. Momo burst into laughter. Thylane was also surprised. Although it was only for a moment, she had never seen Roland smile on her way to escape from her master's territory. Everything is good here, except that it's a little noisy sometimes. But you'll get used to it after a while, Vendy said softly. Let's start with the residence. By the time they finished touring the building, Thylane was speechless with astonishment. How could there be such comfortable rooms in this world? Although they were not large, they were extremely delicate. Even the most common mattress was unimaginably delicate and soft. She had seen the residence of a noble family before. During the years when she was imprisoned by her master, apart from the shackles and chains, she had spent most of her time in the bedroom. Even so, those fine fabrics, with several layers of pure cotton padding, still couldn't compare. When Vendy insisted that she lie down and try it, she even let out a soft moan. The exhaustion accumulated from wandering around flooded her heart, and she almost didn't want to get up again. Momo's performance wasn't much better. Vendy also carefully explained that the reason why this mattress was so soft was because there were hundreds of springs inside. No matter how one rolled, the mattress and the body would be the best fit. Although Thylane did not know what a spring was, she could tell that it was made of pure steel. She did not know whether she should praise the inventor for his ingenuity or waste the material used to make her mattress more comfortable. And that was just one of the many things. For example, a pipe that would automatically release water as soon as the mechanism was turned. For example, there was a mirror hanging in the bathroom that allowed one to clearly see every strand of hair on one's body. For example, stepping on the soft and non-slip floor. For example, a lamp that would glow when filled with magic power. Even the seemingly simple wooden furniture had a unique feel to it. Thylane could not tell the specific difference, but she knew that it was very easy to use. Compared with the spacious and magnificent mansions of the nobles, this was more like a real home. The witch building wasn't like this at the beginning, Vendy said. In the past 3 years, many sisters have participated in the renovation of the witch building and popularized the successful project. Not only the castle district, but also the newly built residential areas outside the city have adopted some of the technologies of the witch building. Of course, it's more convenient to live here if you want to enjoy it first. Can we live in this kind of place? Momo asked hesitantly. Of course, as long as you're willing to join the witch union. We can choose not to join. Thylane was surprised. Because we've experienced the tragedy of the Witch Cooperation Association. For a moment, Vendy looked a little regretful. Let's not talk about that. Anyway, you can choose where you want to go. Do you remember what the inspector asked you when you passed the port checkpoint? Thylane nodded. At that time, Only she and Momo were invited into that small room, and they had been on tenterhooks for a long time. That was a threat check, which was only set up for witches. After all, if a person with magic power is malicious, he can cause more damage than an ordinary person. However, once you're not a threat to Neverwinter, you can live freely in the city. In fact, apart from the Witch Union, there's also a witch organization called the Sleeping Spell, which was founded by escaped witches. Its leader is the younger sister of His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. Vendi paused for a moment. Of course, you can choose not to join any organization and live independently. I'll also provide guidance and help as an individual. But our abilities? That's not the point. The point is what kind of life you want to live, Vendi said with a smile and shook her head. If you don't mind, can you tell me about your past? Thylane was surrounded by a warm feeling. It was as if the red-haired woman in front of her was born to be trustworthy. Thylane did not want to leave, even if it was only for a short while. Perhaps this warmth would disappear after she told her story, but at least for now, she could still stay with her for a little longer. Thylane bit her lip and slowly told Roland what she had been through. Before her awakening as a witch, she was no different from most of the people in the village. After her awakening, her experience was similar to that of the other witches. She was expelled, hated, hunted. Desperate, she heard the rumor of the Bloodfang Association. Undoubtedly, she had been longing for a place to live. At the risk of being caught by the church, Thylane had finally arrived at Archduke Island and found a guide for the Bloodfang Association. She had never expected that she would face a greater disaster. Not only did the Bloodfang Association not accept her, but they also sold her to a noble in the kingdom of Wolfheart. In the following years, she had been sold many times until she fell into the hands of her former owner. Thylane's ability had also become a way of entertainment. The pills with magic power could not only relieve pain but also relieve anxiety, happiness, and other feelings. In terms of treatment, its significance was negligible, because the negative experience would not be eliminated. It would only be delayed until the drug's effect was over. It was fine if the injury was not serious, but if the pain exceeded a certain level, the moment it erupted was no less than receiving an additional fatal injury. Therefore, her former owner had completely regarded her as a tool for pleasure and constantly used the pills to obtain greater pleasure. Not only that, he even shared her with the other nobles, using this kind of trade to strengthen their relationship. It was at that time that Thylane met Momo and several witches who had been sold by the Bloodfang Association. She then realized that the so-called place to live was just a lie made up by the Bloodfang Association and the nobles. Compared to capturing them, it was undoubtedly much easier to wait for the witches to come to them. Later, Thylane was horrified to find that with the invasion of the church, the witches at the private banquets began to disappear one by one. Gradually, only she and Momo were left. It wasn't until one of the nobles let slip that she learned that those people either treated the witches as merits to be handed over, or treated them as trouble and quietly got rid of them. As for the way to solve the problem, just hearing about it made her shudder. Thylane decided to take advantage of the chaos caused by the Church of Hermes to escape with Momo. Chapter 1271. The so-called magic potion did not require pills to take effect. She had never told the nobles that her magic power could be attached to anything. Although it was easy to control the amount of magic power she consumed by taking small pills, the nobles had neglected this important point. In that private banquet, Thylane had used her magic power on all the food and drinks. Only on such an absurd occasion would the nobles lower their guard against her. It turned out that when the pleasure accumulated to a high level, it could be as deadly as pain. When the participants realized that the pleasure was too intense, it was already too late. They clutched their chests and fell to the ground, twitching. Even those who did not eat much felt weak in the limbs and looked dazed as if they were enjoying the ultimate pleasure in the world. The female slaves in the room were so scared that they immediately fled. The guards had no time to stop them. Thylane and Momo took advantage of the chaos and ran out of the manor. After that, they had to hide from place to place. When they heard that Grey Castle was being relocated, they decided to go to the sedimentation bay to try their luck. I see. Vendi took them into her arms. You must have suffered a lot along the way, right? I promise that it won't happen again. Don't you dislike us? Vilain bit her lip. Why should I dislike us? Because of your terrible experiences? Vendi asked softly. If that's the case, I was almost treated like this by the church. There's no reason to blame the victim instead of the perpetrator. But our ability will only bring misfortune to people. Vilain clenched her fists. That's not up to you. But once you experience that kind of pleasure, you'll never forget it. You'll become more and more demanding. In the end, you'll only pursue pleasure and nothing else. If you stay here, I'm afraid. You're afraid that His Majesty can't control himself, or that you're a potential demon. Vendi comforted her. Don't worry. Our Majesty, how should I put it? Although he doesn't look like a king, he's definitely an unusually good person. Vilain was stunned. An unusually good person? It was the first time that she had heard the royal family use this term. It means that you can never guess his thoughts, and you can't use convention to judge his actions. Therefore, any prior worries and fears are meaningless. Trust is the most important thing. Vendi's voice suddenly became unusually soft. The Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association were also rescued in this way. After a moment of silence, she looked at Momo. By the way, you mentioned your abilities. Could it be that Momo also? This time, the two of them hesitated for a long time. In the end, Momo took the initiative to speak. My former master didn't want me to use my ability anymore, so he dug out my eyes after I awakened. Vendi had already noticed this abnormality. On Momo's face, there was a dirty rag covering half of her forehead. She thought it was to cover a burn or a tattoo, but it turned out to be more serious than that. After saying that, the man slowly took off the rag on his head, revealing the empty eye sockets below. But they didn't know that this could only make me lose half of my vision. Only the god's locket of retribution can block it. Vendi could not help but sigh. A witch who could completely combine magic power with her body was called an extraordinary. Apparently, Momo's situation had nothing to do with being an extraordinary. It was very likely that her ability happened to work on her vision, which caused her eyes to suffer an unexpected disaster. Those nobles didn't take Momo's ability seriously at first. Later, something happened, and then Master attacked her. Vilain said in a low voice. They called Momo the child of hell, and used all kinds of punishments on her. She almost died. Vendi stroked Momo's scarred eye sockets lovingly. What did you see? Can you tell me? Momo lowered her head and said. A number. What? A countdown number indicating the deadline. Vendi finally realized what Momo meant. She could not help but gasp. Is Vilain referring to? Vilain thought to herself. Momo nodded and said. It came true. A noble who only had one life left died the following year. Vendi could not help but fall silent. She finally understood why those nobles had done this to Momo. It was hard for anyone to accept the deadline, especially when there were only a few years left. Even she did not want to get an answer from this ability. But is it really possible? Vendi asked after thinking for a moment. After all, accidents can happen at any time. Vilain and Vilain were stunned. What's wrong? Did I say something wrong? No. Vilain quickly waved her hand. I just think you're different from the others. I didn't expect you to ask about the details of the ability first. Oh, what did you expect me to do? Vilain replied in embarrassment. Push Momo away, ask her whether she used her ability or not, and then drive us out of the castle as far as possible. Vendi could not help laughing. Abilities aren't good or bad. The key lies in the person who uses them. Besides, the more you know about them, the easier it will be for you to use them in the future. Do you think my ability will be useful? Momo asked incredulously. I'm not sure. But His Majesty once told me that every witch's ability has its uses. Just because it doesn't work now doesn't mean it won't work in the future. Vilain stood in a daze for a long while before she slowly replied. This ability can't predict accidents. I've seen some animals being slaughtered with the numbers above their heads for several years. But what? Vendi asked. Some of the numbers have different colors. I don't know what they mean, but I have a feeling that they're different. If you're willing to join the Witch Union, you'll know the reason soon. After all, every new member has to learn how to control their ability and test all aspects of it. Only when you have a deep understanding of your ability can you advance to the next level. Advance? Thylane asked in confusion. You'll find out in the future. Awakening magic power is just the beginning. There's still a lot to learn. Vendi spread out her hands. Have you made up your mind? Thylane and Momo looked at each other. If you can accept this, we're willing to join the Witch Union. Chapter 1272. To welcome our new members, cheers. In the evening, a long table was set up in the open space in front of the witch building, and a lively welcome party was held. Vendi and Scroll took the lead and raised their glasses to the two witches. Cheers, the other witches said in unison. Thylane and Momo held their glasses and did not know what to do. Thylane did not expect that after she had agreed to join the Witch Union, Vendi would take her to a hot bath and put on a new set of clothes, including underwear and socks. Before Thylane could recover from her gratitude and guilt, she was taken to the front of the witch building again, but this time, the lawn had changed. You just have to shout cheers and drink all the drink in the glass, Lorger demonstrated. Like me, gulp, gulp, gulp. Cheers, cheers. Thylane plucked up her courage and imitated Lily. She then closed her eyes and put the glass to her mouth. Tat, tat, tat. The crowd burst into whistles and applause. Lorger is trying to make people drink again, Lily said, curling her lips. Who said you have to drink all the drink in one gulp? I think she just wants to drink. But that's Evelyn's strawberry liquor, right? It's as good as the Wolf Girls. I underestimated her, Mystery Moon said in amazement. Such a talent must join our detective group. So in the future, your group will be filled with lazy and drunkards. It's indeed a good match for you. You're also in the group? Mystery Moon raised her index finger. I know. And you still owe me a $10 bill. Oh, forget it. We can start over. Go away. Burp. Thylane gulped down the whole glass of liquor and felt her vision blurring. She had been forced to drink all kinds of liquor before, but none of them was as hot as this one. The liquor did not taste bitter when it entered her throat. Instead, it tasted rich and mellow. It was not until it entered her stomach that she realized it was much richer than ale. However, the biggest difference was not the wine, but her mood at the moment. Seeing the wolf girl pouring another glass of wine and the witch's enthusiastic smiles, for the first time, Thylane felt that drinking was not so painful after all. It made him want to empathize with everyone, and it also loosened the emotions that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time. At this moment, a tall woman walked up to her with a wine glass in her hand. Welcome to Neverwinter. My name is Annie. Just like you, I come from the kingdom of Wolfheart. Even my experience in finding the Bloodfang Association is similar to yours. Thylane was stunned. Did the Bloodfang Association? That's right, but I escaped halfway. In addition, there are many witches who escaped from the kingdom of Wolfheart to Grey Castle, such as this one. A seemingly bashful witch was pulled out from behind Roland. Iffy, she used to be a member of the Bloodfang Association. But she didn't know that Heidi Morgan sold witches. Fortunately, it's all over now. It took Thylane a long time to get a general understanding of the establishment of the Bloodfang Association. It turned out that she and Momo were not the only ones who were forced to live in Grey Castle because of Heidi Morgan's selfish desires. This nightmarish organization had also vanished into thin air 2 years ago. Hearing this, Thylane could not help but feel relieved. On their way to escape, they had dreamed of being caught by the Bloodfang Association and sent back to the nobles. Now that they knew the organization no longer existed, it was like a heavy knot in their hearts had been untied. I'm sorry. Iffy lowered her head. If I could have stopped Heidi, none of this would have happened. It's not your fault. Momo shook her head. And, even if you could have stopped her, you couldn't have stopped the nobles. It's true. It doesn't matter whether the leader is a witch or not. Without Heidi, someone else would have come to make a new deal with them. Thylane was well aware of those people's desires. Once they had tasted the sweetness, they would not give up easily. See, I told you they wouldn't blame you, Annie said with a smile. Now that you're in Neverwinter, you can come to us if you have any difficulties in the future. Even a silly girl like Iffy can live here. I'm sure you'll have no problem. Cheers, Annie said and raised her glass. Cheers, Thylane said more fluently this time. It's my turn again. Lorger shouted with a blush. Me too. Lightning joined in. I'm an adult now. I can drink. Coo coo coo. You can't. Pigeons can't drink. Coo. Hey, don't just drink. Eat something. Nana, you're not an adult yet. Don't play with them. The atmosphere on the lawn became more and more lively. It's been a long time since we had new members. Now that we have 2 new members, everyone seems very happy, Scroll, who was sitting beside the long table, said with a sigh. It's the right thing to do to show them around the witch building first. I'm beginning to understand His Majesty's tricks. Vendi smiled. Even if they get in touch with the sleeping spell first, I'm confident that I can win them over. According to His Majesty, this is called sugarcoating. Something. You're getting better and better, Scroll joked. You thought you weren't capable enough at first, but now you're planning to make Princess Tilly his girlfriend. I'm just making an analogy. You've been learning everything since you were in the Witch Cooperation Association. Vendi poured Scroll a glass of chaos drink. But I can't get tired of watching such a lively scene. It's a pity that we can only watch from the sidelines. Scroll shrugged. What's wrong with that? If possible, I'd like to stay by their side and watch, Vendi said softly. Scroll did not respond. The 2 of them fell silent. They watched the lively crowd from afar while enjoying the delicious food at the banquet. For them, this was not silence, but a kind of tacit understanding formed after a long time together. Until a familiar voice interrupted. After the banquet, His Majesty wants to see the witch named Momo. Nightingale's figure gradually emerged from the mist. Vendi quickly realized what Roland was thinking. Her relaxed expression slightly froze. This. Take her there, Scroll said. From the moment you told him your ability, this was bound to happen. After all, His Majesty is more curious than anyone else. Vendi was silent for a moment. I see. If you don't want to know the answer, you can leave first. I think His Majesty will understand. Scroll paused. But no matter what the answer is, we'll do the same, won't we? Chapter 1273. When the lights in the backyard dimmed, Roland saw the witch in the report in the office. She looked young, at most 16 or 17 years old. Her hands and feet were slender, and her body was thin. It was obvious that she was malnourished. Although she had washed her hair, her short, light brown hair was still as yellow as straw. The most eye-catching thing about her was the black blindfold on her face. Although it had been replaced with a new one, it still stood out in comparison to her young features. Your Majesty, she's Momo, Vendi said. Roland's voice seemed to wake her up. The girl hurriedly knelt down and tried to lower her head as much as possible. You're Your Majesty. Pull her up. Roland put down the drawing in his hand and replied in a gentle tone. Don't be nervous. This isn't a formal occasion, so you don't have to be so cautious. The reason why I asked you to come here is very simple. I want you to perform your ability on me. Momo, who had just regained her balance, suddenly looked flustered. Your Majesty, this. I'm afraid. I know that not everyone is satisfied with their time limit, and some people will even vent their anger on others after getting an answer that they don't like. Roland comforted her. But I just want to know the result. No matter what it is, I won't blame you. I can promise you that. Normally, this kind of thing should be done after Vendi finished her ability test. However, her ability was so special that he could not suppress his curiosity. In fact, he had always had a guess about Zero Soul Battlefield, but he had never been able to verify it. Now he finally had a chance to verify it. Your Majesty, Momo said through gritted teeth. Aren't you afraid at all? Roland knew that if it were in the past, he would never take the initiative to ask such a question. As the saying goes, a mediocre person worries too much. Knowing how long he could live would undoubtedly add to his troubles. However, the longer he stayed on the throne, the more he felt that he had a great responsibility. Obviously, the mentality of an ordinary person was no longer suitable for the current situation. If the other party's description wasn't wrong, predicting the age itself was an extremely valuable piece of information. In another world, it could be called revealing the secrets of heaven. It would be a pity to treat it as a heavy burden. However, even if he said these thoughts, the other party would not understand, so Roland just smiled. No matter how afraid I am, it's not as if it doesn't exist. Momo clenched her fists. After a while, she nodded and said, "Since you asked for it, forgive me for being rude." "Your Majesty." Vendi took a deep breath. "Please allow me to take my leave." Roland gazed at her for a moment. "I thought you and Scroll were the ones who wanted to know the most. I can't be as calm as you, but as Scroll said, no matter what the result is, we will support you to the end." After the door was closed, Roland turned his head. "What about you?" Momo was stunned. "Isn't that obvious?" Then Nightingale appeared behind her, which startled the girl. "I want to know everything about you, no matter if it's good or bad." Two people with completely different personalities. Roland laughed inwardly. "Then let's begin." Momo looked back and forth between Nightingale and him several times in surprise. Finally, she took off her blindfold as if she had made up her mind. When she raised her head again, a red light appeared in her empty eye sockets. The eyeball, which seemed to be made of magic, reflected on the deep scar and looked particularly strange. Roland could imagine what it would look like when it overlapped with the eye. In the future, this kind of strange pupil would definitely be sought after by a large number of people, but in this era, it was not unusual for it to be regarded as a demon's eye. "How is it? Did you see anything?" Momo looked at Roland, and then suddenly opened her eyes wide. The red light kept jumping as if it was stirred by an invisible wind. In just a few seconds, the light quietly went out. She took 2 steps back and sat on the ground powerlessly. Roland noticed that Momo's face was covered in sweat. "What's wrong?" He stood up. Nightingale dashed to Momo's side and reached out her hand to support her. This is the side effect of overconsumption of magic power. Can this ability only see one person at a time? No. I've never seen such a scene before, Momo gasped. It's like there are many strings of numbers flashing, appearing and disappearing constantly, and the colors are completely different. Until the end, the group of numbers is fixed. What is it? Roland asked. Momo swallowed and replied with difficulty, 17 red. How can it be? Nightingale was greatly surprised. Roland's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, his guess was right. The winner of the soul battlefield could indeed obtain everything, but the premise was that the winner must have magic power. Whether it was lifespan or ability, they all had to be realized through magic power. Magic power endowed the extraordinaries with a strong physique, and also enabled the large hybrid demonic beasts to have the power to support their bodies. Without magic power, nothing could be achieved. But then again, 17 years was shorter than he had imagined. Although he had long known that Prince Roland's physique was not very good, he did not expect it to be so bad. Could it be that he had spent too much time on sensual pleasures in his early years that his body was exhausted? How about, I have another look. Momo struggled to stand up. No need. That's all for today. Roland waved his hand. Overconsumption of magic power will make you faint. Moreover, it's meaningless to look at it before you figure out the details of the ability. But Your Majesty, as I said, I just want to know the result. You don't have to worry about it, Roland stopped her. Go back and have a good rest. From tomorrow onwards, Vendi will take you to have an ability test and learn how to control magic power. If you want to look at it again, it's not too late to do so then. Also, help me to keep this a secret, okay? Momo looked at him in surprise for a moment and nodded vigorously, as if she had just woken up. After sending the girl to Vendi, Nightingale returned to the office and walked step by step to Roland, who was standing in front of the French window. Do you regret it? Roland tilted his head. Are you kidding me? Nightingale said grumpily. I never regret my decisions. But what about you? What are you going to do in the next 17 years? It's better to know sooner than later. Besides, It's still uncertain whether this will be the final result. Looking at the scattered lights outside the window, Roland found that he was calmer than he had expected. Let's not talk about the fact that Tequila's soul container can retain its consciousness. After we figure out the magic power in the future, it may not be difficult to create a new body. The premise is that the future really exists, Nightingale said with a frown. That's right. So the first thing we need to do is to win the Battle of Divine Will during this period, Roland said word by word. Chapter 1274. In the Tusk City, the capital of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The city, which had been looted by the church, had yet to recover. Standing on the highest point of the castle, one could see that many streets and alleys in the outskirts of the city had become ruins. Compared to the Tusk Castle, which had been ravaged by the demonic disease, Tusk City was much luckier. At least, it was not like the Tusk Castle, where piles of rotten corpses could still be seen in the wells and drains. Several months ago, this area was still the territory of the Tusk family, a branch of the royal family. Ironaxe did not pay attention to the struggle between the Tusk, Token and Redstone gates, but the sudden appearance of the red mist forced him to make some adjustments. After all, no matter how poor the Tusk City was, it was still one of the most important cities in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and it was connected to the main road from the north to the south. Only by conquering this city could the troops of the Kingdom of Everwinter reach safety. There was nothing worth mentioning in the course of the battle. Even without the support of the Longsong cannons, Ironaxe had mobilized 5 temporary squads of 500 soldiers to break into the Tusk Castle, which was known as a natural stronghold, and the Tusk City, which had strong walls, with mortars and anti-demon grenades. The Castellan, Hybach, was shot down by a precise shooter when he went forward to supervise the battle. The remaining nobles surrendered one after another, and one of the 3 major forces in the Kingdom of Wolfheart was destroyed. As the top military officer who had followed Roland since the first battle in Border Town, Ironaxe was the one who knew how fast Neverwinter was improving. 5 years ago, the First Army was still fighting with the Duke of Longsong, but now, as long as His Majesty wanted, the First Army could easily destroy any kingdom. It could be said that their growth had far surpassed the others, and they were no longer on the same level as the nobles. However, this did not make Ironaxe feel relaxed or complacent. The greater the gap between humans and demons, the more he knew how great the gap between humans and demons was. Facing the demons supported by the red mist, the First Army could barely stand firm in the Kingdom of Everwinter. Every day, troops would retreat back to the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the casualty reports never stopped. In the absence of a permanent line of defense, the enemy's ability to advance and pursue made it difficult for the teams to guard against them. Furthermore, there were reports that the enemy had suddenly appeared on the path that the retreating team members had to pass through several times. That path had clearly been checked repeatedly and confirmed to be safe. This kind of passive situation would undoubtedly have a negative impact on the morale of the troops. The simplest way to deal with it was to immediately transfer all the troops back to the Cage Mountain to rest and reorganize. However, Ironaxe knew that orders and tasks were more important than anything else. Since His Majesty needed more people, he could not withdraw all the troops for fear of casualties. In that case, the only way left was to counterattack. He clenched his fist with all his might and punched the demon's face. Only in this way could they slow down their unbridled pursuit and allow the evacuating troops to vent their anger. He chose the Tusk City as his target. The demon's defense seems to be weakening, Brian said while holding the telescope. Since His Majesty began to mobilize troops, he had followed the First Fleet from the southernmost region to the Sedimentation Bay. Together with him were 1,500 Majin clan warriors. This was the first time in Greycastle's history that the Sand Nation had been conscripted. It started from the border of the Everwinter Kingdom. Ironaxe nodded. Edith was right. It's a double-edged sword for the demons to build the obelisk on the ridge of the continent. It's a hidden place, but it also prevents them from moving south. Looking north from the top of the castle tower, one could see the blood-like gloomy clouds between the sky and the earth. That was the ever-expanding red mist, which had now crossed the boundary between the Everwinter Kingdom and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and was slowly approaching the Tusk City. The city below the gloomy clouds was Goldwater Town in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Half of the town had been enveloped by the red mist, but there was still no sign of the fortress-like monstrous beasts. There were also very few devil beasts hovering in the sky, as if they had been forgotten by the demons. If this had happened before the appearance of the red mist, it would have been almost impossible for this to happen. After this period of fighting, the general staff had a general understanding of the demon's strategy. In a sense, they coincided with His Majesty's strategic intention, which was to control more human cities and make humans work for them. That was why the First Army, which had evacuated the civilians, was a priority target. In order to occupy human territory as quickly as possible, they would often take the initiative to attack. They would use the fortress-like monstrous beasts to create a small red mist area, so that their troops could move quickly from one place to another like frogs and attack the cities before the red mist arrived. However, when most of the kingdom of Everwinter fell into the hands of the demons, their speed of advance slowed down significantly. This meant that with the expansion of their territory, the demons were already having a hard time. Looking at the situation, it was easy to understand. It took time to coerce humans and build camps. When they were short of manpower, the more land they occupied, the less troops they could mobilize. Another key point was that the demons did not need to gather their main force to fight against the humans. With sufficient logistics, they could pose a fatal threat to the First Army by relying on a small force. Therefore, starting from the border of Everwinter, the frequency of the enemy's attacks had decreased significantly. Perhaps they did not reduce the total number of people invested in the attack, but at this moment, the contact area between the red mist and the mainland had been stretched from the initial point to the current line that was hundreds of kilometers long. It was impossible to cover everything without greatly increasing the number of troops. Iron Axe was keenly aware of this. "Sir, the goods from Neverwinter have all been sent to the Tusk City." A soldier ran up the tower and reported. "Finally!" Iron Axe exclaimed. He turned to Brian and said, "Let's go and have a look." When they came out of the city, they saw hundreds of iron buckets in the open space in front of the city gate. They were about half a man's height and a cubit wide. They were perfectly round, and did not have a single opening. "Sir, what are these?" Brian walked around one of the buckets, feeling puzzled. If they were containers, they should have a handle to open them. But if they were weapons, actual combat had proven that fixed explosives were far less effective than cannons. It was too impractical to rely on them to defeat the demons. He pushed the bucket with his hand and found that it did not move at all. Apparently, it was filled with something and was extremely heavy. It was not an easy task to transport these hundreds of metal buckets to the front lines. For them to be worth expending such precious transportation resources, they were definitely not unimportant items. Chapter 1275. In an abandoned house in Broken Tooth Castle, Jodl was observing the situation in the Tusk City through a peephole. Due to the height difference, he could only see a small area near the city gate. That was the checkpoint they had to take down as soon as the battle began. In this operation, the Majins would be the vanguard of the charge. It was not that Lord Brian intended to use them as expendable resources, but that they had fought for this opportunity. Proving oneself by force and exchanging merits for resources was the general rule in the southernmost region. Jodl came from a small, unremarkable clan in the oasis. When the Silver Stream oasis slowly disappeared, his clan was already on the brink of death. If not for that, he wouldn't have taken such a huge risk to deal with the Northerners. But now, everyone in the clan had safely migrated to the port of Clearwater, the evergreen land that they had always dreamed of. This was the reward he had gotten for the battle between the Great Chief and the Wildwave and Cutbone clans. Therefore, Jodl volunteered to fight for a simple reason. He wanted to kill more enemies so that his tribe could live a better life. As for who the enemies were, it did not matter. Even the demons from hell could not be scarier than hunger, thirst, and fear that they might not see tomorrow. He believed that most of the Sand Nation people who came here had the same idea. "Did you find anything?" someone behind him asked. "No, except that the red mist is getting thicker and thicker. I can't see anything else." Jodl quietly blocked the hole and turned around. The one who asked the question was Fairy, the smallest in the team. The gun on his back was almost longer than his torso. A deep scar stretched from his forehead to the corner of his mouth, which did not match his youthful features. Jodl had a deep impression of this person. Even though he looked young, the qualities he displayed in training and actual combat were different from normal people. Even those famous warriors with rich experience might not be able to win against him. Logically speaking, such a man should not be unknown in the small oasis. But the fact was that Jodl had never heard of such a man before. "We've been waiting for almost 2 weeks, haven't we?" Fairy complained. "It's driving us crazy to have hundreds of people in one place. Didn't Lord Brian say that the demons have giant flying beasts? If we don't want to attract the enemy's attention, we have to set up an ambush." Jodl was a little surprised. "Haven't you participated in the hunting ceremony? In order to hunt a sandworm, it's normal to hide in the bushes for half a month. What's wrong with waiting a little longer?" According to the plan, Iron Axe had mobilized a total of about 2,000 people to hide in the northern district of Broken Tooth Castle, and arranged a reserve force of 1,000 people further south in the inner city. The hiding place had already been tidied up. On the surface, it looked no different from ruins, but inside, a simple shelter had been built. The upper floor was used for scouting, while the lower floor was used for living. Not only was water and food prepared, even sleeping and excrement areas were separated. Although it couldn't completely isolate the smell, compared to the hunting ceremony, this was already a relatively relaxed environment. He did not understand why the other party would suddenly complain about this. "You don't understand." Fairy wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he glared at him and sat down against the wall. "What do you think the metal cans they prepared before were used for? They dug holes and buried wires. In the end, when the enemy came, there was no movement at all." "I don't know, but if it's something the chief made, I don't think it's strange that anything happened." He had seen too many incredible items, tools, and weapons in the past year or so. "I hope it won't be the next pill of madness," Fairy muttered. "Pill of madness?" He seemed to have heard of it somewhere. Jodl was about to ask him when suddenly someone poked his head out from under the floor. "There's news from the rear. The attack is about to begin. Get ready quickly." Phew. Fairy let out a long breath. "Finally, we don't have to wait anymore. I'll go down now." Jodl was more thoughtful. "What's the order to attack? Is it still the same as planned?" "That's right," the man replied. "When the explosion sounds, it's the time for the whole army to move out." "It's time." Iron Axe put down the telescope, turned around and ordered, "Turn on the power now." "Yes, sir." 2 soldiers of the demolition team started to turn the hand-operated generator, while the third one put his hand on the lever. It was finally time to verify the results of their long preparation and plan. The red mist had now covered the whole of the kingdom of Wolfheart. If the first army continued to retreat, the Broken Tooth Castle would soon fall into the demons' hands. The 2 cities were like Silver City and Grey Castle, which were very close to each other. In the past, the Broken Tooth Castle had become an excellent barrier for the Tusk City because of its natural terrain. There was a saying in the kingdom of Wolfheart that the Tusk City would be safe as long as the Tusk City remained intact. But now they were going to use the Broken Tooth Castle as a stepping stone to give the enemies who occupied the Tusk City a head-on blow. Iron Axe had long noticed that the demons did not always wear the breathing device. Perhaps, for them, the equipment was an extra burden. Except for the mad demons who chased after the refugees, the rest of the demons would only move around in the red mist. This was obviously an opportunity for the first army. "Sir, the demolition team is ready." Iron Axe ordered in a low voice, "Detonate." As the soldier pressed the lever, a dazzling red light suddenly rose to the north of the Broken Tooth Castle. More than 500 iron barrels were detonated at the same time. Countless golden flames rose to the sky and engulfed the entire king's city. Everyone heard a series of continuous rumbling sounds. However, this was just the beginning. The barrels were filled with the rubber worm gels made by Kyle, but they were also filled with highly flammable oil, aluminum, magnesium powder, and other combustion-supporting agents. They looked soft and harmless when they were solidified, but when the blast wave of the explosives tore them into mist and sent them into the sky, the dispersed gels became extremely deadly. The burning spread so fast that it was no different from an explosion. The air was heated to nearly 1,000 degrees in a very short time, and the expanding airflow further fueled the fire. A chain reaction took place at this moment, probably because the temperature had exceeded a certain threshold. The rain of fire that was supposed to fall suddenly tore the sky apart and formed a huge net over the city like an orange-red lightning. The flames did not spread from the top to the bottom, but from the ground to the sky. Iron Axe was also shocked by this scene. After a while, he realized that the red mist had been ignited by the rain of fire. This scene seemed to be very clear, but in fact, it happened in a split second. The rapidly splitting red lightning filled the entire sky in an instant, turning the net into an impenetrable cover. Then there was an even bigger explosion. The fiery cover was broken, and a huge fireball rose from it like a firebird breaking out of its shell, soaring into the sky. This roar was much louder than the sound of the iron barrels being detonated. Iron Axe even saw the air around King's City being distorted. Chapter 1276. When they heard the first explosion, Jodel's team followed Brian's order and rushed out of their hiding places one by one. But before they could take a few steps, another earth-shattering noise came from the north. The noise was so loud that it even stirred up the dust on the ruins. The ground shook so violently that they almost fell to the ground. Jodel steadied himself and looked in the direction of the Tusk City in surprise. Because he was at a low position, he could only see an orange fireball rising with billowing smoke, like a fist waving towards the sky. Around the fireball, the red mist was brightly illuminated, as if the sky was burning. The Sand Nation's eyes were filled with fear. This scene could only be described as the wrath of the three gods. "Don't be afraid." Jodel clenched his teeth, raised his arms and shouted. "That's the chief's way to deal with the enemy. It's the demons who should be afraid." His words made everyone come back to their senses. Yes, it's the chief's heavenly fire. Don't stop. Keep going. The stagnant team started running again. People kept coming out from the cracks in the walls, the windows, the corners of the collapsed houses, and joined the attacking team. Soon, this inconspicuous group of people became an unstoppable tide, rushing toward the Tusk City. Jodel was the first to run. Although he had been convinced by the chief for a long time, he always thought that the Sand Nation was better at fighting than the Northerners, especially a warrior from a small clan like him who was born in a barren oasis and had been fighting with death since he was a child. It wasn't just bows and arrows. Even if it was a gun, it would be the same. After receiving Brian's training, he had even developed a unique skill. Not only was he good at target shooting, but he could also hit the target while running. Now was undoubtedly the time to prove himself. Not only did he want to be the first to rush into the city, but he also wanted to be the first to win the battle. He wanted Jodel's name to be known by the whole army. However, when the troops climbed up the slope and saw the city wall of the Tusk City, a terrible heat wave swept over them. For a moment, Jodel almost thought that he was back in the southernmost region, and that he was still on the top of a sand dune in the middle of summer. The hot air scorched his skin, making it hard for him to even open his eyes. The people behind them weren't any better. It was as if the whole team had crashed into an invisible wall. Their speed slowed down, and some of the Northerners who had rushed to the front even ran back pathetically. They crouched down at the bottom of the slope, as if they could avoid the sudden heat by doing so. Jodel forced himself to walk a few dozen steps, feeling that something was wrong. The fireball that rose into the air had already been extinguished, leaving only a ring of smoke that was still spreading. A piece of the red mist that had originally covered the sky was missing, as if it had been bitten off by a giant beast. The surrounding mist did not immediately fill in, instead forming a large arc of emptiness. Through the open city gate, he saw that the ground inside the city seemed to be churning with heat waves. The contours of the buildings had become extremely distorted, especially the wooden houses that had been destroyed by the explosion. The scattered scorched black pillars were like the claws of a demon that had reached out from the ground. The enemies did not rush over to stop them, nor did they flee in panic. In fact, he could not find any trace of the demons. At the same time, Jodl felt that he could not breathe. The surging heat around him made him dare not open his mouth to breathe. His body also seemed to resist moving forward. Every step was as heavy as a mountain. Damn it, when did I become so weak? The city wall was not far away, but he felt that he had lost all his strength and his vision was blurring. Jodl staggered and fell to the ground. The last thing he saw was Fairy's disgusted face as he dragged him away. The outcome of this battle was completely beyond the expectations of Iron Axe and the general staff. According to the original plan, most of the outer city would be turned into a sea of fire by the rows of burning barrels that surrounded the northern part of the royal city. The raging flames would not only engulf the flammable houses, but also incinerate the red mist inside and outside the city. This would make the Tusk City an isolated island for the time being, and the demons who did not carry breathing devices would inevitably fall into chaos and panic. The final decision was made by the ambush troops. Although Roland did not know the exact number of the demons, according to his previous intelligence, the demons would deploy their troops according to the number of people they occupied. The fact that the Tusk City had been evacuated would definitely be noticed by the scouts of the enemies. Therefore, during the first few days when the red mist covered the city, there would not be more than 500 enemies entering the city. In other words, the First Army would have an absolute advantage in both numbers and momentum. As for how many enemies they could kill in the end, that was not the focus of this battle. After all, in order to avoid the detection of the devil beasts, the soldiers had to hide in secret passages and ruins, and all the heavy weapons were useless. It was not difficult to suppress the enemies with rifles and anti-demon grenades, but it was difficult to chase after the enemies. The main purpose of this battle was to reduce the demons' momentum. As long as the demons realized that the retreating human beings still had the ability to fight back, they would be able to relieve the pressure on the evacuating troops. However, the battle came to an abrupt end at the stage of the explosion. The expected wall of fire did not appear. Instead, it turned into an earth-shattering explosion. King's City, where the flames swept across, became a forbidden area. The ambush troops did not even have the chance to cross the city gate before they were forced back by the heat wave. Some of them even suffered burns and fainted. At this point, it was obvious that the follow-up attack could not be carried out. Of course, this did not mean that the battle was a failure. Iron Axe could even feel the scorching air outside the city wall, so he could easily imagine the situation inside the city. It had never been proven that the demons could withstand the heat better than humans. The only thing that Iron Axe regretted was that he could not go to the battlefield himself to see the specific results of this battle. He did not know when the temperature inside the city would drop, and this was obviously not a good place to stay. "Sir, all the troops have retreated from the Tusk Castle. We're the only ones left." Brian walked into the temporary command center, his eyes full of excitement. For him, who had witnessed this scene in a real battle without experiencing the test of the new weapon, this battle was indeed a scene that he would remember for the rest of his life. "Good. Let's retreat." Iron Axe nodded. "I guess it won't be long before the enemies notice us. When the pursuing troops arrive, it won't be easy for us to leave." Chapter 1277. 20 hours ago, Hacksword received a report that there was a huge fireball in the direction of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. At that time, Hacksword was still in a city in the west of the Kingdom of Everwinter, accepting the allegiance of a human lord. To be honest, Hacksword did not want to pay attention to such a small thing. If it were not for the fact that the reporter repeatedly mentioned the strange explosion and the unusual destructive power, Hacksword would not have come in person. Hacksword was annoyed enough to deal with human beings, but he was the only one in the entire Western Front who could do this. Not every subordinate was as smart as Ursruk, who would always learn something useful. Most ascendants regarded human beings as bugs, let alone learning their language. Hacksword's generals were no exception. They were all loyal and capable, but they were only limited to fighting. If Hacksword asked them to negotiate with human beings, they would tear the human beings into pieces in less than half a day. However, human beings were very easy to tame. Although they were physically weak, They were very smart. In the early stage of development, they could replace many inferior demons. Therefore, it was not in the interest of Hacksword to kill them all. In the end, it was all Valkyrie's fault. Valkyries was the senior lord who was good at this, but now she was still immersed in the red mist pool. Hacksword always felt that his patience was running out. However, when Hacksword flew over the Tusk City, he immediately realized that something was wrong. There were very few floating monsters in the city, as if something had cleaned up the city. The inside of the city was a mess. Houses that had been washed away and charred wooden frames could be seen everywhere. When the team landed, Hacksword found that the ground was warm and a pungent smell came to his face. Hacksword soon found the source of the smell. A group of strange-looking inferior demons curled up on the street. Their skin had turned black and fallen off. Obviously, they had been burned to death by the fire. What was strange was that there was no obvious fire starter around the inferior demons. There were only bricks and mud around them. It was hard to imagine how the fire could reach them. There was more than one such scene. Totolock, you and your subordinates will each take 10 people to search for the human army. If you find anything, report to me immediately. Yes, Master. Siasses, find out what's going on. Also, find out if there are any survivors. Yes, my lord. The ascended person quickly accepted the order and left. Hacksword, on the other hand, walked along the long street and slowly made his way to the northern part of the city, where the damage was the most severe. According to the report, it was a supply team of inferior demons that were attacked. These pitiful creatures that could never advance were at the bottom of the race, equivalent to human laborers or slaves. At that time, they were transporting a batch of obsidian and secondary red mist pawns into the Tusk City, so that they could build a camp for junior demons or level UPS. This could also be seen from the wreckage at the scene. The cut and dyed obsidian was scattered everywhere, and some of the inferior demons were still in the same state when they were moved. There was no sign of fighting, which meant that the humans did not have direct contact with the supply team. The battle broke out abruptly and ended abruptly. Therefore, it was reasonable to infer that the other party had set up a trap here instead of gathering an army under the nose of the Bogle beasts. Totolock's search this time was likely to be fruitless. But the more it was so, the more apprehensive Sky Lord felt. He would rather the enemies come in groups, which would make it easier for them to be discovered. Hacksword did not care about the lives of the inferior demons, but he could not afford to lose the battle on the Western Front. If the main force ran into such a trap, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no doubt that the enemies had used fire to attack. Hacksword was no stranger to fire. In the past battles of Divine Will, they had also used fire to conquer human cities. However, because the red mist did not like high temperatures, it was rare to see it. However, it was the first time for Sky Lord to see a fire that could burn an inferior demon to death. Unless the whole city was turned into a huge furnace. But how was that possible? If the humans had such a means, Sky Lord had to know that the Western Front was in danger. Wait. Fire? An image suddenly flashed across Hacksword's mind. It was the image he saw when he searched Kaburdabi's memory in the realm of mind. A bright fireball suddenly burst out like the rising sun. Was it this kind of fire weapon that Kaburdabi saw? Sky Lord could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Just as Sky Lord was feeling bewildered, Siasses's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. My lord, the basic situation has been investigated. This supply team has a total of 350 inferior demons. At the same time, there are more than 10 primal demons as guards. We haven't found any survivors yet, but I think I've figured out what those bugs are capable of. Oh, tell me about it. Please follow me. Hacksword followed Siasses to the north of the city wall. Some primal life forms were busy digging something. Around them was a pile of black metal fragments. Further away, a few siege vehicles were lying on the side of the road. Ever since the symbiotic demons were successfully cultivated, these old war machines became specialized transportation tools. Look. Siasses stretched out his tentacles and picked up a fragment on the ground. There were obvious traces of melting. If you put them together, they should be a container. There are hundreds of them lined up along the edge of the city. I think the bugs probably stuffed them with snow powder and combustibles. They planned to cut off the supply team's escape route, and then launch an attack during the chaos. After fighting with humans for so long, Hacksword was no stranger to the weapons they used. In the process of hunting down the enemies, he had obtained a lot of them. Whether it was the fire branch or the fire crossbow, they both used explosive materials such as snow powder as a primer. Compared to magic-powered weapons, it was obviously much more complicated. Because of this, the structure of these weapons was very exquisite. This was a skill that had not been seen 400 years ago. If it was just an ordinary flame, how could it cause such great damage? My lord, I'm afraid these flames are not ordinary. At least their temperature is much higher than ordinary flowing fire. But even so, they can't kill all the inferior demons. I think the key lies in those siege vehicles. What do you mean? Hacksword asked. Siaces was a psionic warlock. Ascendants who evolved from this branch had sharp observation skills. This was why the Sky Lord had sent him to investigate the battlefield. When the snow powder exploded, it probably affected the siege vehicles that were passing through the city gate. The latter are usually used to transport heavy objects, such as red mist ponds or storage tanks. The high temperature caused them to explode and further aggravated the disintegration of the red mist. Siaces' rapidly swaying tentacles made hissing sounds. You know, when the temperature reaches a certain level, anything can be ignited, including us. Siaces' explanation made Hacksword feel slightly relieved. Regardless of whether this explosion was a coincidence, at least the huge fragments of the metal bucket made him feel more at ease. Needing to bury a large number of traps beforehand, and being able to launch them at any time were two completely different concepts. As long as they took strict precautions, these traps would not pose a threat to the large army in the wild. Of course, it also knew that it was not easy to quickly inspect a human city. Forbidding the red mist ponds and storage tanks from being transported and stacked together could not completely eliminate this threat. It did not think that the simple-minded primal demons and inferior demons could solve this problem. The most effective way was to use the humans themselves. My lord, what should we do next? Slow down the speed of entering the city and let the humans inspect for us. Hacksword quickly made a decision. We can't transfer more inferior demons from other places for the time being. Let Snow Reflection Castle make up for the losses. I think Earl Marwain will be happy to work for me. Chapter 1278. Ever since the red mist poured down from the peak of the impassable mountain, everything in the world seemed to be covered by a thin veil. Marwain Parker thought that he would feel as uncomfortable as being in a dusty mine, but to his surprise he did not feel any discomfort. If he breathed hard, he could even feel a trace of dampness and coolness. According to the demon commander, the mist contained the essence of life. Not only would it not cause any harm to humans, but it would also nourish them. Only witches who specialized in going against it would suffer a fatal backlash. Let's not talk about the credibility of this statement for now, but from the looks of it, other than slightly affecting the line of sight, there were no other disadvantages. After a month, he had basically gotten used to life in the red mist. Your Grace, His Excellency the Sky Lord has sent someone. Just then, a guard walked into the study. He's waiting for you in the courtyard. Marwain nodded without batting an eyelid. Ask him to stay where he is. I'll go over right away. Yes. After the guard closed the door, Marwain could not help but smile. That's right, Duke. No matter how many times he heard it, he was elated. A month ago, when the demons passed through the ice abyss and attacked Snow Reflection Castle, he thought it was the rumored end of the world. He did not expect the demons to let him go. After discarding his inherent prejudice, Marwain realized that the demon who called himself the Sky Lord was not as difficult to communicate with as he had imagined. To a certain extent, he was even easier to deal with than the people of Grey Castle. At least the former would not turn a noble's territory into nothingness without a word. The demons did not collect taxes, seize land, or seize power. As long as they swore loyalty, they would be able to keep everything they had and even have the chance to obtain more. Apart from the fact that their methods were a little rough, there were no other disadvantages. especially after the Sky Lord handed him the management of the 3 cities around Snow Reflection Castle. He felt that this might not be a bad idea. Snow Reflection Castle was like an isolated island, easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was difficult for others to threaten his territory, and it was difficult for him to expand it. He had thought that he would have to wear the title of Earl for the rest of his life, but he did not expect that he would take a big step forward when the end of the world came. With the entire northern region of the Kingdom of Everwinter, he was fully deserving of the title of Duke of the Northern Region. Marwain pressed his hand to the corner of his mouth, and with great difficulty, he suppressed his smile. He closed the window and turned to go downstairs. Yes, when the demons invaded the city, they did kill dozens of guards and hundreds of citizens, but how could there be no deaths in war? Wasn't the demarcation line between the nobles also decided through war? Now that he controlled 4 cities, not only did the imperial guards not shrink, but they doubled in number. Needless to say, as long as there was land and food for them to live, they would be able to make up for it in a few years. As for those who said behind his back that he chose to submit to the devil out of fear, they should all be sent to the gallows. Upon entering the courtyard, Marwain immediately saw the messenger sent by the Sky Lord, as well as the gigantic monster lying beside him. To be honest, he could not tell the difference between these guys from their appearance. Unlike Hacksword, they were ugly and crude, and did not know any manners or manners. If it wasn't for the sake of the commander of the Devil Army, he didn't want to deal with these beasts at all. What instructions does Your Excellency Skylord have for me? The other party took out a stone from his mount's bag and handed it to him. Then he opened his bloody mouth and said in a clumsy tone, "You. Listen." Magic voice transmission again. Feeling the fishy smell from the messenger's mouth, Marwain could not help but lean back slightly, trying hard to suppress the disgust in his heart. "I'm listening." The stone flickered twice and soon, a familiar voice sounded out of nowhere. "How does it feel to be the lord of a territory? I hope you haven't forgotten your promise, Mr. Lord." "Of course not, Your Excellency," Marwain hurriedly replied. "I've always been ready to serve you." "Very good. I believe that your people have gotten used to our existence in a month. Now it's time. I need you to gather a team to assist us in building a camp, not in Everwinter, but in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. We need at least 2,000 people. Of course, the more the better. Do I need to do manual labor?" Marwain estimated that it would not be difficult to gather so many people from 4 cities. "Leave it to me, Your Excellency. I didn't choose the wrong person." The Sky Lord's voice was filled with satisfaction. "Also, how's the research on the weapons I gave you? Can your people replicate them?" Marwain looked troubled. "It's not a problem to use them, but I'm afraid it'll take some time to replicate them. I've gathered the best blacksmiths in the northern region and let them each forge a part, but the progress isn't ideal. I'm afraid it has something to do with the witches. After all, the blacksmiths told me that the parts don't seem to be made by ordinary people." "I think so too." Fortunately, the Sky Lord did not seem to blame him. "But even so, you should be able to use it to counter the people of Grey Castle. This is my second order to you. Send people to stop Grey Castle from plundering the people of Wolfheart. I'll give you the other weapons we seized. But I don't have enough knight." "Then go and recruit them," the Sky Lord interrupted. "Don't you humans like to use this method to expand your subordinates?" He divided his territory and roped in those who had the ability to do things for him. "Don't hesitate to name a price. If you do this well, it won't be difficult for you to become the King of Everwinter." Marwain's body trembled. The King of Everwinter, a title that he had only dared to dream of, had now appeared in front of him in such a way? He suppressed his racing heartbeat and tried his best to control his voice. "Yes, Your Excellency. I'll do my best to complete this task. Hurry up. I want to see the results as soon as possible. I won't let you down." The light from the stone disappeared. "I come back in a week." The messenger climbed onto the flesh-winged monster, raised his hands, and soared into the sky. The latter let out a strange cry, flapped its wings and flew out of the city, quickly disappearing from sight. On the other hand, Marwain's face was covered in flying dust. "Damn it!" He coughed as he thought to himself, if these demons behaved and spoke like the Sky Lord, they probably wouldn't be known as monsters from hell. After returning to the castle, he immediately called for the old scholar. Although the old scholar's previous performance was rather terrible, and he even wet his pants on top of the city wall, Marwain didn't have a more reliable strategist for the time being. After repeating the Sky Lord's request, Marwain asked, "What do you think?" "Your Excellency, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The old scholar held his hand excitedly. "Since your father's generation, I've been serving the Parker family. Expanding our power beyond the Snow Reflection Castle has always been his wish. Now that you've not only accomplished the first step, but also have a chance to become the King of Everwinter, we must seize this opportunity no matter what." "I think so too, but do you think we can really defeat the people of Grey Castle with these knight?" Marwain voiced out his doubts. "You've seen how exquisite those snow powder crossbow bolts are. It's basically impossible to replicate them. And the demons must have a limited number of them. What should we do after we've exhausted them?" "No, Your Excellency, we don't need to fight the army of Grey Castle head-on." The old scholar shook his head. "His Excellency the Sky Lord doesn't plan to do so either." His exact words were, "Stop the plundering." "As far as I know, the troops of Grey Castle are very scattered. As long as we have equal weapons, we can use strategy to take the initiative. If we can successfully destroy a few raiding squads, they will definitely be restrained. In fact, when I was listening to you, I thought of a brilliant plan." "Oh, tell me about it." The old scholar whispered his idea into the Duke's ear. Marwain's face immediately lit up. Chapter 1279. In the city of Neverwinter, Grey Castle. 2 days later, Vendi walked into Roland's office with the test records of the 2 new witches. "I have to say, Your Majesty, their abilities are very complicated," Agatha said as she handed Roland the report. "This is the first time I've seen so many variables in one ability. This is only a part of it. I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more days to figure it out." "Oh." Roland put down his work with great interest and quickly skimmed through the report. "In that case, the Tequila Witches should be very interested, right?" Vendi nodded and said, "They asked Phyllis to test the Chosen One as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the light beams of the 2 witches weren't obvious, and they were far from the key of the instrument of divine retribution." Upon hearing this news, Roland was actually relieved. He had just come up with a plan to electrify the whole city, and all the magic cores were being transformed into the Mystery Moon instrument. If the Chosen One suddenly appeared, Celine would definitely be full of resentment. After all, it would take decades to adjust the ordinary magic cores to the mode of divine retribution, and it would certainly not be a pleasant experience to squat in front of the magic cores every day. According to Honey, these senior Tequila Witches seem to be addicted to sunbathing. Instead of lying on their backs under the noon sun, they would climb out of their caves at night and lie there until sunrise. Since the strong light would hurt the carrier, they should not like to go out. Although Roland did not understand why they were doing this, he could tell that they had been quite relaxed recently. This was undoubtedly a good sign. Roland quickly turned to the last page of the report. Thylane's ability mainly affected emotions, which could only take effect after she had taken it. Like most enchantment witches, her ability had a time limit, which depended on the size of the object and the amount of magic power she had invested. The test results showed that the magic potion could affect more than just joy and pain. It could also affect sleepiness, exhaustion, anxiety, fear. As long as it could be experienced by humans, it could more or less affect them. When the effect of the potion was over, these accumulated emotions would burst out all at once. Roland could roughly understand why the effect of the magic potion was extremely complicated, but the light beam was ordinary. In a sense, it was equivalent to a kind of nerve blocker, temporarily delaying the time for the nerve conduction and hormone effect to take effect a little bit later. Some drugs in the future could also do this, but the side effects were great, and it was easy to get addicted. Of course, the simplicity of the light beam was not enough to measure the value of an ability. If Thylane's magic potion was sold in another world, Its effect and potential profits would definitely make all the pharmaceutical giants jealous. The mechanisms of various mental diseases were far more complicated and difficult to cure than visible internal and external injuries. Although it could not eliminate the symptoms, it could accurately delay them. As long as it was properly controlled, the impact of the disease could be minimized. For example, anxiety, fatigue, and other negative states mainly hindered people's daily lives. If they could delay the onset of their symptoms until they fell asleep, they would be able to stabilize the digestion without realizing it. Once people no longer suffer from distractions and insomnia, the body's recovery speed is much faster. Even if it was a life-threatening injury, the effect of the magic potion could not be underestimated. People would often lose their willpower in the face of severe pain, which would make it difficult for them to take effective emergency measures. As a result, they would miss the golden opportunity to rescue them. If they could give themselves first aid or hold on until the paramedics arrived, their chances of survival would be much higher. After that, the paramedics would only need to prepare for the severe pain and shock, and they would be able to safely get through the most difficult part of the initial period. In addition, there was more than one witch who could treat pain. Roland remembered his sister mentioning that there was a witch named Della on Sleeping Island who could eliminate pain. There was also the hero of the Witch Union, who could transfer non-traumatic diseases to other living creatures. Although it was not clear whether she could transfer mental diseases, it was worth a try. The key was that without Thylane's magic potion, they could not be used effectively. On the battlefield, the soldiers could be seriously injured at any time, but the witches could not do anything else. In fact, many soldiers of the First Army had died on the way to the hospital because they had lost consciousness after being injured and were unable to receive immediate treatment. Now this situation could be greatly improved. According to Vendi's test results, Thylane could only control the direction of the magic potion, such as negative or positive, but she could not control a specific emotion. This was what most new witches lacked the most: learning to understand and accurately control their own abilities. However, with Vendi and Agatha's guidance, Roland did not have to worry about this. When Thylane could make the magic potion work on a specific emotion, the last weakness of the magic potion would be eliminated. Through the report, he could already see the rise of a giant in the pharmaceutical industry. The market for this industry would undoubtedly be bigger than chaos drinks. As for the other witch, Roland stroked the table at the end of the notebook and sighed with emotion. Your Majesty, this is... Nightingale also noticed the various colors on the table. She looked up at Vendi and asked, "Are you sure about the content?" "I can only say so. After all, we don't have enough samples to compare in such a short period of time," Vendi replied. "The only thing we can be sure of is that the numbers don't just decrease." To put it simply, the strange numbers that Momo saw could be regarded as the natural time limit of a person's current stage, and the colors represented different trends of decline. In the report, Vendi recorded the results of her and Momo's observation of the entire city of Neverwinter. The color of the residents in the residential area was lighter than that of the refugees in the temporary residential area. She concluded that hunger, disease, defects, and other unhealthy factors could cause the color change, and the darker the color, the smaller the number. She also mentioned an example. After a migrant from the kingdom of Wolfheart drank the purification water, the number above his head increased from a dark brown 5 to a 7. If this ability was accurate, it could be assumed that this migrant was suffering from some sort of infectious disease. Based on his current state, he only had 5 years left to live. However, after the treatment with the purification water, the stage was changed, and the ability re-evaluated the time limit. Although Vendi did not know the specific meaning of the different colors, she could generally regard them as unhealthy. "Your Majesty." Nightingale's face revealed a worried expression. "It's better than expected, isn't it?" Roland comforted her. "At least it can increase back to normal as long as we use the right method." Vendi opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she held back in the end. Chapter 1280. Roland took a piece of draft paper from the table and roughly calculated the average age of the residents in the residential area and the temporary residential area. He concluded that the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was between 40 and 50, while the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was only about 35. Roland could see many problems from this point alone. Generally speaking, the increase and decline of the average lifespan was a long-term process. At the beginning, the living standard of the residents in Border Town was obviously not much better than that of the refugees. In just 5 years, the local residents' lifespan had increased by a level, and Nana and Lily were undoubtedly the biggest contributors. She can get thousands of data in 2 days. Does Momo need to look at them one by one when she uses her ability? Roland asked. Yes. If she has enough magic power, she can see the numbers of all the people in her field of vision at the same time. Wendy replied softly, but it seems that she has never done this before, and she has never tested her limits. She feels that her ability is a curse. Even if she knows it, she can't do anything about it. It's like watching the people around her die little by little. Nightingale sighed. Curse? Nothing but bringing misfortune? Roland thought disapprovingly. That's a big mistake. When a country developed to a certain extent, any government order could have a very far-reaching impact. The traditional village management obviously could not keep up with the changing pace of the situation, so the significance of statistics came from this. Summarizing, observing, and tracking the changes in these statistics, and making targeted adjustments to the details of the government order, could be said to be an indispensable ability for any organization that wanted to enter the threshold of modern times. And the change in the average lifespan was a very important part of it. If they used conventional methods to record the data, not only would they need enough basic departments and manpower, but it would also take decades of perseverance to see initial results. After all, no one knew how long people could live before they died. At present, except for Neverwinter, the other cities in Grey Castle had only just established a secondary city hall that could carry out government orders. It was common for them to have 1 or 2 staff members, let alone to carry out the detailed population statistics of the residential areas and streets. In fact, Scroll had a lot to do with the fact that the information system for the residents of Neverwinter was so complete. When the administrative office had enough manpower to send literate people to work in grassroots organizations such as the Neighborhood Committee, then Neverwinter would truly meet the requirements of an all-powerful government. On the other hand, Momo could help Grey Castle skip the time accumulation stage and build a preliminary statistical system in a situation where everything was lacking. This was the so-called cooking without rice. And this was under the situation where Grey Castle only had a superficial understanding of her abilities. By the time Wendy found out the specific meanings of the colors, such as the effects of diseases, hunger, and environmental factors, she would be able to easily obtain a large and detailed database. Not to mention, this data also had the effect of prediction. As long as it was used properly, this ability could bring benefits to almost every aspect of the kingdom's operations. The nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart had no idea what they had missed. In Roland's eyes, Momo was already an honorable member of the administrative office. In the future, she would at least be a minister. By the way, has Nana's treatment schedule been arranged? Roland asked as he closed the notebook. Wendy nodded. It's today. Do you want to go with me? The medical center was one of the busiest areas in the city, especially after the end of the war. Nana Pine was no exception. Although she did not need to stay in the laboratory for a long time like Anna, she was already booked for treatment every day. It was said that there were hundreds of people in the queue, and it was still increasing. This was also related to the characteristics of her ability. When she treated a severed limb, all her magic power would be consumed in about a quarter of an hour. As a result, people who lost more than a palm would not be able to apply for treatment. Instead, they would be issued a disability certificate as a substitute. When Nana became an adult or her ability evolved, her magic power would greatly increase. Only then could these injured people jump the queue for treatment. Speaking of which, Nana's day of adulthood should be this year's Months of Demons. Roland thought. For some reason, whenever he mentioned the little girl who used to be in the same class as Anna, The first image that came to his mind was her holding a chicken in her hands and angrily accusing him. "All right, I'll go with you." Momo did not expect that she would not be driven away after showing her ability. Instead, she would be warmly accepted by Vendi. Now she and Thylane both lived in the witch building and became members of the witch union. Every time after dinner, other witches would come to visit Momo. Some of them brought delicious food that Momo did not know the name of, and some of them would kindly instruct Momo on how to use the equipment in the room, and what they needed to pay attention to in the castle district. In just 2 days, Momo's view of the world had changed dramatically. She had never thought that being alive was such a wonderful thing. When Momo learned that she still had a chance to see her eyes again, she threw herself into Vendi's arms and burst into tears. This was the only place where her tears could flow freely. "Don't worry." Vendi patted her on the back and comforted her. Although Nana rarely lives in the witch building, she's also a member of the witch union. She's about the same age as you. I'm sure she'll be happy to cure you. On the appointed day, Momo was taken to the hospital by Belle. On the way to the hospital, Momo had already learned about the basic situation of the healing witches from Belle. Unlike Momo, Miss Pine was not only born into a noble family, but also had great abilities. She was known as the Little Angel of Neverwinter, and had been living in the clouds since the beginning. Momo could almost imagine Miss Pine's appearance. She was a lovely girl who always wore beautiful clothes with a smile on her face, and behaved gracefully. Anyone who saw her would have a good impression of her. Therefore, when Belle called her into the treatment room, Momo was a little nervous and even felt a sense of inferiority. She lowered her head slightly. "Is this the person who's going to be treated next?" A clear voice came into her ears. "Yes, her name is Momo. She's also a witch just like you." Momo felt strangely familiar with the voice. She could not help but look at the speaker in surprise. It was His Majesty. It was at this moment that she saw the legendary Miss Angel. The next moment, Momo used all her strength to stop herself from screaming. Nana Pine was wearing a white coat that covered her whole body, only her eyes were exposed. Not to mention beautiful and gorgeous. Even ordinary people's clothes would not be simple to this degree. Chapter 1281. Don't worry, it's not my blood. Nana took off her robe with the help of Belle. It's just that the injured person's arm was crushed by the rolling mill, so it's inevitable that the scene will be a bit chaotic. Is that so? Yes. Come, let me see your injury. What a strong aura. Are they really the same age? Momo swallowed, carefully took off her blindfold, and slowly walked toward Nana. Well, it's similar to what Sister Vendi said. The magic power should be enough. After the examination, the little girl handed her a bowl of medicine, and then patted the bed next to her. Drink it and lie down. It'll take about 10 minutes. Momo did as she was told, but she was stunned to see the little girl take out a knife. Your Majesty. Vendi. She looked at the two people beside her as if asking for help, and her voice became sobbing. Come on, Nana, Vendi said helplessly. Can't you take it slow and give the new sister some time to adapt? Hey, this is a normal procedure, Nana said in surprise. If we don't cut open the old wound and completely destroy the healed part, the treatment won't work. That's right, but you can chat with her first. Then, talk about the previous case? I think it's more convenient to use a saw than an axe when cutting off a limb. No, I'm not talking about that. Indeed, His Majesty chimed in. A saw can ensure that the cut is basically neat, but if it's a big bone like a leg, it'll be very difficult to cut it, right? The skull is not much better. Those nurses are not much stronger than me. If Sister Anna can help, it'll be much easier. It's my fault. But it's not difficult to solve. How about I design an electric one for you later? I guarantee it'll be broken. Your Majesty, please don't talk about this. Ahem, sorry, when it comes to technical problems, I can't help it. Her voice became vague. Momo turned her head and vaguely saw that Nana seemed to be talking with His Majesty and Vendi. From time to time, Nana moved the knife in her hand back and forth, as if she wanted to experiment on her body. Cut. Saw. An axe? I'm sorry. She slowly closed her eyes. Thylane, I might not be able to see you again after this treatment. She fell asleep. Roland suddenly noticed that Momo had already closed her eyes and entered a stable state of sleep. Nana raised the scalpel and nodded to the two. Then I'll begin. She skillfully cut into the eye socket, removed the ugly old wound, and cleaned the damaged skin. Blood quickly seeped out and dyed the gauze red. Throughout the entire process, her arms were almost completely still. Only her fingertips and wrists were moving with precision. Unlike the treatment, this step could not be achieved by magic power. It was the result of Nana's training so far. Amazing, Vendi said in a low voice. It's all forced out. Nana twitched her mouth. When I was in the military camp, I could only stay for about half a minute for each patient. If I couldn't complete the emergency treatment in the shortest time possible, I probably wouldn't be able to save the later patients. That's why she's so straightforward. Roland could not help but sigh. You used to faint at the sight of blood and those chickens. Your Majesty. Nana rolled her eyes at him. Don't ever mention that again. And you're the culprit. Fine. Roland waved his hand in surrender. Besides, the little girl paused. I think it's good to be like this. At least I'm much stronger than before, right? For a moment, Roland felt as if he had seen her again. Roland could not help but stroke her head. Of course. A few minutes later, Momo's eyes returned to normal. A bowl of sleeping fern will probably last for about 2 hours. Such a small amount of poison won't have too much of an effect on the witch, so we just have to wait for her to wake up naturally, Nana said, looking at Wendy. Thank you. The latter nodded with a smile. By the way, how much magic power do you have left? Roland deliberately pretended to be careless. Can you check for me? Wendy's complexion couldn't help but change, while Nana directly grabbed his arm. Are you hurt? No. I just feel that my nose gets stuffy recently. Then you should go to Lily. Nana withdrew her hand grumpily. I've checked, and there's no reaction from her ability. I think so too. Roland slightly tilted his head to avoid Vendy's puzzled gaze. It seems that Nana's ability is not omnipotent. Roland thought. I don't know if she can't cure those invisible, hidden diseases, or if the red unhealthy state is not a kind of injury. Anyway, I can only wait and find out. When Momo slowly opened her eyes, she saw a sea of red clouds. The overlapping clouds were turning from gold to purple, and drifting away from the afterglow. She could hear the soft but continuous sound of the autumn wind blowing through the grass. Occasionally, she could see 1 or 2 blades of grass flying in the air and passing by her cheeks. Everything was peaceful and quiet. I'm still alive, Momo thought. However, Momo soon noticed something unusual. Her vision seemed to expand a lot, and the blurry scenes in the distance became clearer. She raised her head slightly and saw Thylane leaning over her with a smile. You're awake? Momo realized that she had been lying on her friend's lap, and that they were on the lawn in front of the witch building. How long have I been asleep? Where's Vendy? She left after giving you to me, Thylane shrugged. Thylane shrugged and said, You probably slept for most of the afternoon. Although Wendy said that you would wake up in 2 hours, you don't have to worry. This is a common symptom after you recover your magic power. When you wake up naturally, your body will adapt better. Can you see with your new eyes? Momo sat up and looked around. Ever since her eyes were dug out, she had thought that she would always be in darkness. She had never expected that she could see again. What should I do, Thylane? She murmured. What do you mean? If that's the case, how are we going to repay them? Thylane was stunned for a moment and then chuckled. She looked up at the sky and said, I don't know. However, according to Sister Wendy, as long as we work hard, it should be a kind of repayment. By the way, when you were still asleep, Wendy had already arranged what I had to do. Together with Miss Nana Pine, who healed you, I'm going to provide medical care and treatment for Greycastle. At this point, she scratched her nose and seemed a little embarrassed. Although I still don't quite understand what kind of treatment I can provide. But my ability. Momo clenched her fists. Sister Vendy also said that. She looked up in surprise. Really? Yes. Thylane nodded. and it was His Majesty's idea. He hopes that you can join the administrative office and work with Lady Scroll to run the kingdom. Ah! Momo could not believe her ears. Can I do that? You have to ask yourself that question, Thylane said as she gave Momo a push. I don't even know what I'm doing. But, as long as you learn, you'll figure it out eventually. I'm not as confident as you are. Momo murmured and leaned against Thylane's back. Do you think we can live here forever? Just like home? In fact, I asked Vendi the same question. Ha! After a moment of silence, Thylane's companion answered. Chapter 1282. A week later, Roland received two pieces of good news. First, Iron Axe used the napalm to give the demons a head-on blow, which temporarily slowed down the demons' advance in the north. In the letter, the commander-in-chief described the explosion of the new weapon in detail, which was even more amazing than the experimental results. In fact, the use of fire to restrain demons had been used as early as the first battle of Divine Will. At that time, human beings had set the forests behind the demons on fire many times and caused forest fires that lasted for several days, so that the red mist could not gather at the front line. Because of this, the demons learned their lesson and destroyed forests, grasslands, and even farmlands in order to prevent the demons' supplies from being interrupted. At the same time, even if they were in the area covered by the red mist, they would set up small stone tower camps similar to outposts, just in case. As long as there was red mist in the camps, even if there was a fire in the rear, the demons could hold on until the fire was put out. There was no doubt that Iron Axe and the general staff had been inspired by the above examples, which was why they had planned this siege. The advantage of napalm was that it carried its own fuel, which could cause a raging fire even in an open space, and it was extremely difficult to put out with water. However, no one had expected that the fire would not last long, and it would cause a deflagration that covered the whole city. If only I could ask Summer to reconstruct the scene, Roland thought regretfully. If he could find out the cause, he would be able to use napalm to deal a devastating blow to the demons in the future. Unfortunately, according to the time, the Tusk City should have been swallowed by the red mist again, so it was impossible to sneak in again. Moreover, Roland was quite distressed to use up more than 500 barrels of napalm at one time. After all, the production of oil could be increased as long as more manpower was invested. The key was that the rubber worm's mucus had an affinity with animal blood, which could only be slowly accumulated by the Ministry of Agriculture. Nevertheless, the victory was more important than anything else. In his reply, Roland not only encouraged Iron Axe, but also distributed more than 100 barrels of napalm to the front line. The second piece of good news was that the assembly factory of Fire of Heaven finally had its first biplane successfully rolled off the production line. After he got the news from Anna, he immediately rushed to the factory site with Tilly. This brand new factory was built at the same time as the Air Knight Academy. Compared to the steam engine factory built with bricks and stones 2 or 3 years ago, this new factory was designed to take into account the needs of high-end manufacturing. The steel structure made it have a very wide space inside, which could be used to assemble and repair more than 10 aircrafts at the same time. Lighting lamps hung all over the ceiling. Coupled with the bright and clean terrazzo floor, it could be described as magnificent. Even Tilly couldn't help but exclaim when she approached the factory gate. If it was someone who didn't know the inside story, it wouldn't be strange to think that this place was a palace. In terms of personnel and equipment, Roland had also put in a lot of effort. Not only did he transfer the most experienced managers and workers from various workshops, he also used the third generation of machine tools that were driven by electricity to meet the needs of cutting-edge production. This made it the largest power consumer in the industrial area. If not for the appearance of the Mystery Moon instrument, he would have had to suspend the power supply of other factories to make it run at full capacity. It could be said that the achievements and accumulation of Neverwinter in the past 5 years were all reflected in this new factory. Roland even heard from Barov that the people of Neverwinter were proud to work in this factory. According to the plan, when the new factory was officially put into operation, each of its workstations would undertake a specialized assembly task. From the first workstation to the last, It basically involved the whole process of the aircraft's gradual formation. The body of the aircraft would start from the riveting of the skeleton, attaching the wings, loading the spare parts, pasting the skin, and finally leaving the factory for testing. But now the factory was far from reaching the ideal state. Apart from the workstation closest to the exit of the factory, where a fire of heaven was being painted, the other workstations were empty. How is it? Did the production run into trouble? Roland walked to Anna. Too many to count. Anna shook her head. You don't know how many spare parts and materials the workers have scrapped in order to make this qualified product. Looking at her helpless expression, he could not help but laugh. When he first made this decision, Roland had already anticipated the difficulties. It was almost impossible to master new materials and new installation techniques in a short period of time. And this was under the circumstance that he had tried his best to reduce the difficulty. For example, the joint parts of the aircraft used a new single-sided riveting technology. For this purpose, he specially set up a production line specifically for the production of various types of core rivets and core pulling rivets required for the biplane. Compared to the traditional double-sided rivets, this kind of joint could be fixed with only a knock or core pulling. It had lower requirements for the workers and was more convenient to install. In addition, he also used the experience of model assembly in the later generations for reference. While fixing all the parts with a fixed number, he expressed each assembly step in the form of a diagram. Furthermore, he set up a fool's interface on some easily confused parts to further reduce the possibility of carelessness leading to the wrong installation. Even so, in nearly half a month, the workers only managed to produce a finished product. One could imagine the difficulty. So did you personally participate? Tilly suddenly asked. Not really. Anna shrugged. She would only reveal this unsteady demeanor in front of a few people. Roland asked me to only be responsible for commanding. No matter what trouble they encountered, I had to let them solve it themselves. Although there were several times when I almost couldn't control myself. Tilly laughed. So you're actually very happy, aren't you? Because one of them was successful. Anna could not help but smile. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. If there's one, there will be a second one. When all the workers get started, I think there will soon be more qualified aircraft. Speaking of this, Tilly paused, turned her head and glanced at Roland. It would be even better if you praised her at this time. I didn't count on him. Anna curled her lips. Roland was confused. What was going on? Weren't they discussing the production of the aircraft? Why did the topic change to him? At this moment, a personal guard ran over. Your Majesty, all the factory preparations for the first fire of heaven have been completed. The celebration ceremony can begin at any time. Roland shifted his attention back to the biplane. He saw two newly painted symbols on the light gray fuselage. One was the royal coat of arms of Grey Castle, and the other was a knight holding a spear and spreading his wings. The entire aircraft looked majestic, but he felt that something was missing. He pondered for a moment, then came to a sudden realization. He waved his hand and said, "Attach the ribbon." Soon, the bright red ribbon was attached to the aircraft, and a large red flower was attached to the propeller at the nose of the aircraft. That's right. He nodded in satisfaction. This was the perfect condition for the fire of heaven to leave the factory. Following that was a speech, ribbon cutting, and a group photo. Roland, Anna, Tilly, and all the contributors and workers who had participated in the design and manufacture of the aircraft stood together. Behind them was the brand new red biplane numbered 001. Look at me here. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 1283. Your Excellency, Frost Town is just ahead of us. A knight reported. Marwayne Parker raised his binoculars and observed the situation in the town. This place was located at the southwest border of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. There were hills all around, and one could clearly see the situation in the town from any vantage point. Frost Town was easy to attack and difficult to defend, so it had never been built into a castle. There were many towns like this on the border between the two kingdoms, and there was nothing special about it. Normally, Marwayne wouldn't even spare it a second glance, But now, it had a unique significance. Did you get any news from the scouts? Yes. I only spent a few silver royals, and the townspeople told me everything, the knight said proudly. There's indeed a group of Grey Castle soldiers here. There aren't many of them, only about 40 to 50 people. They show up every once in a while. Why don't they station here? It's a mountain road after the border, and I heard that wild wolves often appear. Without an escort, none of the refugees will be able to cross the border. Marwain immediately understood what was going on. The red mist did not spread along the border. Instead, it spread in an ever-expanding semicircle. The furthest part of the red mist had already passed the royal city of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the closest part was still in the Kingdom of Everwinter. Compared to going to a neighboring kingdom, it was more reassuring to fight within the kingdom. Frost Town not only met this requirement, but also because of its remote location. Those who had been fooled by Grey Castle soldiers would rarely enter the Kingdom of Wolfheart from here. Frost Town was almost as inconspicuous as a mosquito's leg compared to the major cities with convenient transportation. What Marwain wanted was precisely the small number of people. The small number of people meant that Grey Castle soldiers would not pay too much attention to this place, which was undoubtedly confirmed by the scouts. Just as the old scholar had said, the demons would deal with those who were difficult to deal with. What Marwain needed to do was to bite them where they were weak. As long as this matter was spread out, no matter how big or small the outcome of the battle was, it would make the other side hesitate in taking action. Of course, that was not all the old scholar's plan. There were even more ruthless tricks waiting for the people of Grey Castle. If he could succeed 2 or 3 times, he believed that the other party's plundering operation would suffer a great setback. Perhaps the Sky Lord would also rely on him more. Let's go back. It's time to have a good talk with everyone. After spending half a day on the road to the nearest town, Marwain entered the former lord's mansion in high spirits. This place originally belonged to a nameless baron, but not long ago, he was so scared by the approaching red mist and the rumors of demons that he fled, which saved him a lot of time to negotiate. This land didn't belong to him yet. After all, his power was limited to the 4 cities of the northern region. However, Marwain believed that the Parker family's expansion wouldn't stop there. Soon, a group of nobles gathered together and waited for him to speak. The Duke looked around and silently memorized everyone's faces and expressions. There were a total of 45 applicants in the room. Most of them were knight, but there were also a few baron. The one with the highest status was the former lord of the northernmost port, Viscount Narnos. These people had either been forced to lose their territories, or had all their people stolen by the people of Grey Castle. With the promise of fiefdom as a reward, they did not hesitate to pledge their allegiance to him. If the guards, trusted aides, and squires that they had brought with them were also included, the number of soldiers in this army was already more than 300. They had the advantage in numbers, so this was obviously an excellent opportunity. More importantly, for the first time, there was no difference in weapons between them and their opponents. In the past, the nobles of Everwinter had been unable to put up a fight because the firearms of the people of Grey Castle were too ferocious. The speed and range of their fire were far beyond that of their imitation snow powder weapons. If not for this batch of reinforcements from the Sky Lord, no nobles would be willing to help him fight against the people of Grey Castle, let alone 300 people. How is everyone's preparation going? Marwain cleared his throat. I believe your men are familiar with those firearms, right? Isn't it just loading bullets into the gun, aiming at the target, and pulling the trigger? Viscount Narnos said indignantly. Those things that even the farmers in the mountains can use, there's no reason we can't use them. Those guys who were captured had to be tortured heavily before they confessed, and they even spoke hesitantly and unwillingly. I thought they were nothing special. That's right. It's true that they're exquisite and beyond our reach, but when it comes to using them, they're much easier than swords. A knight echoed. I've also interrogated the people of Grey Castle. They've only been in the army for 2 years and can usually learn how to use firearms in a month, but I've spent 5 years just practicing with my sword. A month is because those untouchables are too slow. If it were me, 3 days would be enough. Another person's comment caused a burst of laughter. I'll let them know that without firearms, they're nothing. Aren't firearms all thanks to the witches? I think the king of Greycastle just took advantage of the time when the church was sweeping through the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart. The hearts of the people were useful. Marwain realized that these nobles had been suppressing their anger for a long time and were eager to take revenge on the people of Greycastle. Although this mixed team had just been put together a week ago and some of them did not even know each other's names, at least they had the same goal and were full of vigor. However, the number of those crossbow bolts is limited, and the number of bullets distributed to each of us is even smaller. The knight who had followed him before spread out his hands and said, "If possible, I hope you can use them sparingly and only open fire when the distance is close." Marwain looked at him approvingly. This man was called Fuller, a native of the western region. He had brought him here because he liked his quick-wittedness. From these words, Marwain knew that Fuller had already grasped the key to victory. It would be great if he could find a chance to recruit him. "Don't worry," the Duke said confidently. "The people of Greycastle don't have many bullets either. There are many mountains in the northwest of the kingdom of Wolfheart, which limits their carrying capacity. Besides, they'll let us get close. Isn't it their slogan to escort the refugees out of danger?" The others also sneered. "That's right. As long as the enemies came to rob people, they would definitely not give up on this wave of easily obtained lambs." However, they did not know that sometimes the wolf pack would also hide among them. In this world, the hunter often became the prey in the blink of an eye. By the time they realized that it was a trap, they would already be trapped in a cage. After that, as long as they disguised themselves as the enemies and looted the towns along the way, the propaganda of the people of Greycastle would definitely collapse. If they did this a few more times, they wouldn't be able to pull another person away. Chapter 1284. When Fishball climbed over the rugged hilltop, the view in front of him suddenly became clear. Orange-yellow wildflowers were blooming all over the ground, forming a sharp contrast with the barren mountain path. When the autumn wind blew, waves would appear in the sea of flowers. This kind of beautiful scenery created by nature would always be able to lift the spirits of tired travelers. The town in the middle of the sea of flowers was their destination, Frost Town. This was the 6th time he had crossed the valley. Although Fishball was the squad leader of the High Gear Squad, he was also a soldier of the First Army. With the order to speed up the evacuation, many soldiers like him also joined the emergency rescue. Since the evacuation, the demons had not attacked this route. Perhaps it was because it was too far away from the Red Mist, or the demons did not care about the refugees. But no matter what, every person he brought back to Neverwinter was a force to be reckoned with in Neverwinter. Meanwhile, he had already brought nearly 1,000 people to the rear. According to the usual practice, this team would set up camp outside the town, and then send someone to negotiate with the remaining refugees before evacuating them in batches. When they first came here, the First Army had warned the residents that the road ahead was dangerous, and it was best not to go south without permission. As long as they waited in the town for a few days, the army of Greycastle would escort them out. Of course, not everyone would believe this. In fact, Fishball had encountered many refugees on the way. They either ran out of food or were driven into a corner by wild beasts. However, this was already a relatively lucky outcome. Those who were even more unlucky died silently in the valley. But this time, Fishball noticed something different. Looking down from the hillside, he saw that the Frost Town, which had always been sparsely populated, was now crowded. Did a big city collapse? Hansen, a scout in the same team, whistled. So many refugees in just 10 days. We're going to be very busy. Fishball was also very excited. Previously, he had only gathered about 1,000 people after 1 or 2 months. This time, he believed that they would be able to catch up with or even surpass the previous number. Although he did not know why these refugees did not choose other routes but gathered in this town at the bottom of the valley, as long as they were here, the First Army had the obligation to take them to a safe place. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but quicken their pace. Going downhill was much easier than going uphill. Half an hour later, the team arrived at the camp in Frost Town. The refugees in the town also noticed their arrival. Many people rushed to the streets and quickly gathered into a stream of people, rushing in their direction. These people, aren't they a little too impatient? Someone joked. Didn't I tell them to wait in the town? Could it be that they've run out of food and are hoping to get some food from us? Most of the people agreed with this statement. If it's really a disaster in a nearby city, it's normal that they didn't bring enough food. Fishball quickly made a decision. But it's not good for us to do a head count and maintain order, so we still have to stop them. 10 of you will help me set up the checkpoint. The rest of you will be on guard. He knew very well how terrifying it would be if the crowd went out of control. If they could not stop the refugees, the begging would turn into a robbery, and these people would be no different from bandits. Most of the time, these two types of people were separated by a thin line. Yes, the soldiers quickly spread out and held the guns on their backs in their hands. As the distance between the two sides shortened, the figures of the refugees became clearer. Fishball raised the megaphone, turned it to the loudest volume, and shouted, "This is the rescue team of the 1st Army of Grey Castle. Please don't panic. Stop immediately and stay where you are for further instructions. We have enough food and medicine, but we need your cooperation to distribute them. I repeat, stop, or we'll take forceful measures." The crowd hesitated for a moment, but soon they started running again as if something was pushing them from behind. Fishball frowned and asked his teammates to aim their guns at the sky, ready to fire a warning shot. Just then, Hansen let out a soft cry. "Huh, what's wrong?" Fishball asked. "Monitor, their clothes seem a little strange," Hansen said while observing through the telescope. "Have you ever seen a refugee carrying a roll of cloth?" "A roll of cloth?" Fishball was puzzled. He snatched the telescope and looked at the crowd. The distance between the two sides was about 300 meters, and he could roughly see their clothes and belongings through the telescope. From the way they were dressed, they were indeed a group of runaways in dire straits. But just as the scout had said, most of them had a long or short strip of cloth on their bodies. Some of them were carried on their backs, while others were hung at their waists. It was strange no matter how one looked at it. It was human nature for refugees to take all their belongings with them before they fled. The First Army would usually ask them to abandon their luggage and travel light, but they would not interfere with things that would not cause trouble or inconvenience to the migration, such as gold royals. Over the past 2 months, Fishball had seen many strange belongings, but this was the first time he had seen a roll of cloth. But the more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. The refugees were dressed in rags, and they were all wearing shoes. Their ragged clothes did not look old at all, but looked like they had been damaged recently. The distance between the two sides was now less than 200 meters. Bang! His teammates fired a warning shot. The crowd immediately dispersed, and a scene that made Fishball's blood freeze appeared. Probably startled by the gunshot, several people at the front of the line hurriedly pulled off the cloth, revealing the standard-issue rifle of the First Army. This action seemed to set off a wave in the crowd, and the others followed suit. Those cloth strips of different lengths were actually used to hide weapons, and the things wrapped under them ranged from swords to halberds. It could be said that there was everything one could think of. He suddenly realized that this was a trap. "Retreat to the camp!" Fishball shouted at his teammates. "Run!" Before his voice died away, a series of gunshots came from the other side. Fishball could even hear the whooshing sound of bullets flying past his ears, and from time to time, the surrounding grass splashed with mud. The other 9 people also came to their senses, and they all turned around and rushed back to the camp. The team had camped there several times. Although there were no blockhouses or trenches, the simple sandstone barracks were still there. It was originally built to defend against the demons, but now it was the only shelter on the empty hillside. When Fishball crawled and ran into the barracks, there was no one left standing. Compared to the incessant gunshots from the opposite side, the return fire from the camp was very scattered. Compared to the 9 people who had set up the barracks, the team of more than 40 people was obviously a more eye-catching target. Fishball's heart almost jumped out of his throat when he thought that they would probably be shot at while they were defenseless. He grabbed Hansen and said, "Quick, go and check on the others." After Hansen ran away with his body crouched, Fishball raised his gun and aimed at the refugees, who were surrounding them from all directions. No, they were definitely not refugees, but nobles who had defected to the demons. Only the demons could have so many weapons from the First Army. Damn it, Fishball thought bitterly. He never expected that his own kind would use the refugees to set up such a trap. Don't they know whose accomplice they are? Squad leader. Hansen came back faster than Fishball had expected, and it only took him a few seconds. Everyone is fine. Only one person is slightly injured, but it's been bandaged. It won't affect the battle. Fishball was stunned. Only one person is injured? The gunshots were so fierce just now. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.